morning, good afternoon, and good evening to our many friends and business partners who are joining from more than 140 countries across 6 continents. Welcome to the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Global Forum focusing on economic recovery. First, let me thank our sponsors, Amazon, Google, and UPS, for making this remarkable gathering possible. The fact that we're convening this way, virtually, globally, and by the thousands, is evidence of the transformation that will mark this point in our shared history. We now join a small number of generations that have collectively experienced disruption on a global scale. For some of us, that disruption has meant losing loved ones. For others, we've lost jobs, opportunities, businesses. We know that in some parts of the world, some of you are experiencing great devastation even as we speak, and our hearts go out to you. We'll talk about that disruption and that acuity of the situation later in the program. But for the moment, focusing on the recovery, I think we have to say that when the pandemic recedes, and it will, and when the recovery is widespread, and it must be, our gift to history could be a vibrant new era of innovation that solves global challenges and growth that lifts countries and communities everywhere. A few years ago, the Canadian psychologist Steven Pinker authored a fiercely optimistic book called Enlightenment Now. In it, he wrote, if news outlets truly reported the changing state of the world, they could have run the headline, "Number of people in extreme poverty fell by 137,000 since yesterday." And they could have run it every day of the last 25 years. That, of course, was before the scourge of the pandemic and its economic fallout. There are significant gains to recover and much more progress to be made, particularly in the parts of the world where the pain and the suffering of the past year remain acute. At the U.S. Chamber, we are fiercely optimistic that better days lie ahead for all of us. All the factors that led to human progress in the years preceding COVID and during COVID will usher in the bright new era that should follow. Human ingenuity, free enterprise, private sector innovation, open economies that allow for the movement of talent and commerce and ideas, and the right balance of public policy and business leadership. These will be the pillars of a dynamic, sustainable, inclusive, and resilient global economy driven by business with the help of government for the good of people everywhere. How do we get there? It starts with the recovery, which remains fragile. In the US, thanks to a precedent-shattering collaboration between companies on both sides of the Atlantic, supported and aided by our partners in government, more than 35% of our population is fully vaccinated. We're getting back to health and back to strength. Our economy is poised for a great resurgence, signaled by 6.4% growth in the first quarter. But this trajectory is not a foregone conclusion. The wrong policies from government could stop the U.S. economic recovery in its tracks. That's why the Chamber is fighting back against proposals such as raising corporate tax rates to the highest in the developed world, which would disincentivize inbound investment. And it's why we're fighting for policies to rebuild our infrastructure, welcome global talent, and enable our workforce to get back on the job and drive our economy forward. A strong U.S. recovery is needed to help lead the global recovery. We also understand that the pandemic won't be over anywhere until it is over everywhere. No nation will truly get back to strength until all nations get back to health. The U.S. Chamber has teamed with the Business Roundtable and leaders of more than 50 top American companies to form the Global Task Force on Pandemic Response, a public-private partnership to coordinate relief for COVID-19 surges globally. Currently, the task force is working closely with partners to address the worsening crisis in India. The calamity unfolding there and in other parts of the world is a sobering reminder that the pandemic is far from over. A little later this morning, we'll hear a lot more about this work directly from the leaders of the 3 founding co-sponsors of the task force. We'll also hear from some of the government officials who are working closely with industry to defeat the coronavirus here and abroad. As the world emerges from the pandemic, the recovery will give way to rebuilding. And this morning, I'd like to briefly outline 3 priorities for rebuilding a stronger global economy oriented to the future. The first is to strengthen international trade and investment and facilitate global commerce through secure, sustainable, and efficient supply chains. The open exchange of ideas and goods, services, data, and people have played a central role in driving the astonishing reduction in extreme poverty worldwide from 36% in 1990 to less than 10% before the pandemic. Several hundred million people have since slid back into poverty, and to help lift them up, economies would be smart to open themselves up to opportunities in markets around the world. It's not lost on us here in the US that 95% of the world's customers live beyond our shores. America is open for business. We're eager to ink new trade deals and strengthen established alliances, and we are committed to the multilateral organizations that support global trade and public health. We must also be strong in standing against policies at home and abroad that undermine openness and penalize job creators. The US must work with our allies to stand up to China while also pursuing new negotiations with Beijing to protect our intellectual property. On trade, when we stand still, we fall behind. And as we consider how to reboot the global economy and retool for a more sustainable future, America cannot sit on the sidelines. The second priority is technology. The pandemic sure proved in new and astonishing ways how technology improves our lives, keeps us connected, and drives commerce. Many small businesses shifted their focus from brick and mortar to digital, enabling them not only to serve their communities, but to export to countries around the globe. Large businesses are increasingly using tech platforms to conduct global services trade. As a result, trade in services is growing 60% faster than trade in goods, and digital tools are opening up global markets for small businesses in unprecedented ways. The potential for people, communities, and economies to significantly boost growth through digital commerce is vast. To realize that potential, we must set policies that allow data to flow and innovation to flourish. But there are protectionist forces seeking to close off and strangle this incredible source of dynamism. So we must fight back against restrictions on data flows, regulations that stifle innovation and investment, and policies that undermine intellectual property, all of which threaten the global economic recovery. The third priority is sustainability, and it is part and parcel of the innovation I just discussed. In fact, sustainability isn't possible without innovation. For years, business has been driving the innovation and investment needed to solve global environmental challenges. I'm proud to serve on the board of AGCO, a leading US-based global agriculture company. It's exciting and encouraging to see firsthand how business is leading cutting-edge sustainable solutions for farmers. These farmers are feeding a hungry world as the global population is on track to reach 10 billion people in 2050. When it comes to climate change, businesses are leading the development and financing, building and operation of the solutions to address this challenge. Private industry has already invested billions and set their own ambitious climate goals. Thanks to private sector leadership, the US is now among the world's leaders in reducing emissions. And the US Chamber is proud of the steps our members are taking. We also recognize the role of government. Tackling climate change will require both the ideas and investment of American enterprise and smart bipartisan policy solutions. We're committed to advancing both. Last week at the B7 CEO Summit, we had a really insightful discussion with business leaders on different continents about how business can work cooperatively across those continents to address this global challenge. We also know that our world is still reliant on traditional sources of energy, as demonstrated by the fuel shortages that were caused by the cyber attack on a critical pipeline in the US. Achieving our desired reductions in greenhouse gas emissions while also meeting the world's growing demand for power will require new technology, and the private sector will have to lead the way. Of course, all of us know that sustainability is about more than energy and the environment. It's about equitable, enduring, broad-based growth. It's about equality of opportunity and bringing in diverse voices, viewpoints, and backgrounds. It's about building resilient economies that will lift people up and enable them to live secure, stable, fulfilling lives. And it's about fostering generations that are successively better off. All of that comes down to people putting their talent and ideas to work through employment. which allows businesses to invest and grow and innovate, which drives stronger economies that create more opportunities for people. This virtuous cycle is possible only through free enterprise. It is free enterprise that drives solutions to global problems and innovations that improve life and advance mankind and womankind. And therein lies our opportunity in this moment in history to create a brighter collective future for all of us. We look forward to working with our partners in business and government around the globe to do just that. So time permits me only to scratch the surface on a few of our many global priorities. Fortunately, we're going to be able to deep dive into these and other pressing topics over the course of this two-day forum and to bring leading voices from the global community into the conversation. Today and tomorrow, we're thrilled to host CEOs and senior executives from some of the world's most exciting and innovative companies, current and former government officials, experts in all facets of international affairs and policy, and heads of state and government. We are grateful that the 78th Secretary of the Treasury of the United States, Janet Yellen, will offer up remarks to help open this global forum. And you'll also hear from leaders of 3 regions of the world, President Kenyatta of Kenya, President Duque of Colombia, and Prime Minister Lee of Singapore. It is now my honor to turn things over to Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen for a message on how the Biden administration is engaging with the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the introduction, Suzanne, and for hosting this important forum. Thank you for the introduction, Suzanne, and for hosting this important forum. The Chamber of Commerce has been a leader in responding to the pandemic and promoting global recovery. I look forward to continuing to work with you and the private sector to realize the Biden administration's vision for a better American economy. Anyone observing the United States in recent years would see striking contrasts across our economic landscape. We've been the largest economy in the world for over a century, and our national income has risen steadily. Yet in recent decades, a rising share of that income has gone to profits and disproportionate wage gains at the top, while middle-class families have faced wage stagnation. We're a global leader in innovation and home to the world's top universities. We recently flew a helicopter on Mars. Yet visitors from abroad might be excused for concluding that their airports, trains, and highways are more modern and better maintained. We have world-class capital markets, financial institutions, angel investors who can muster funding for the most novel and ambitious projects. Yet many families are not able to finance a home, save for their children's education, or save adequately for their retirement. So it's understandable that many Americans feel left behind. More and more are expressing their discontent, and they're right to do so. Our country has experienced discontent before, notably in the late 1800s, when huge disparities emerged across the economy in the wake of the Industrial Revolution. The short-lived Populist Party, in its first political platform, proclaimed, "The people are demoralized. The fruits of the toil of millions are badly stolen to build up colossal fortunes for a few, unprecedented in the history of mankind." Fortunately, what followed that wave of populism was a progressive movement led by people willing to think big and act big to address long-standing flaws in our system. They created a new, more equitable and stable order. In the years just before and after World War I, They introduced a progressive income tax, strengthened anti-monopoly laws, created the Federal Reserve, and provided women the right to vote. Then, amidst the Great Depression, the New Deal created Social Security, the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, and the Fair Labor Standards Act. That legislation, some of it controversial in its time, continues to provide opportunity and assurance and stability that Americans count on every day. The question today is whether we too can think big and act big. The American people are already doing this with their innovative spirit, their tireless efforts to not just make ends meet, but to improve the lives of their family. Today, I will talk about how the Biden administration is setting out to do our part to tackle unaddressed problems that have built up over several decades, improving our economy in ways that will benefit our children and grandchildren. Americans are known for optimism and the ability to achieve what we set our minds to. I have full confidence that we are up to the task. Our first problem from day one was COVID-19. We have experienced a tragic loss of lives over the last year, and also the loss of jobs and livelihoods. By nearly every measure, health, income, wealth, or job loss, lower income populations have been hardest hit, with women and people of color facing the worst outcomes. So our immediate priority was to end the pandemic and address its economic ravages. Securing the production and distribution of vaccines in the United States has been a monumental and successful effort. Beyond vaccines, our goal was to pass the American Rescue Plan to help Americans reach the end of the pandemic with their family finances intact. Because of this support, our country is now unlikely to suffer the kind of long-lasting impairment that we saw after the global financial crisis, when foreclosures and bankruptcies weighed upon the economy for years. The IMF projects that this legislation will allow our economy to regain its pre-pandemic size this year and even regain its pre-pandemic path by next year. We're ahead of other advanced economies in this regard. At the same time, ending the pandemic gives us the opportunity to shape our recovery and tackle our most pressing socioeconomic challenges. And that brings me to the second problem, our long-standing underinvestment in public infrastructure and institutions that drive productivity and support workers and families. To address this, I believe we must reorient our framing of U.S. fiscal policy. For decades, the prevailing focus has been on the need to decrease and then limit the size of government as a share of the economy. Within that framing, there has been broad bipartisan support for ensuring that defense expenditures respond to U.S. security needs, and for protecting entitlement spending, which has increased with rising healthcare costs and population aging. Discretionary spending has been compressed as a consequence. Now, exceptions have been made, most often in the form of temporary support for the economy following shocks and in times of recession, both through spending increases and tax cuts. But ambitious and valuable initiatives like the Affordable Care Act engendered enough controversy to foreclose at that time the possibility of broadening the agenda. This approach to U.S. fiscal policy, founded on a distrust of government motives and effectiveness, along with resistance to higher taxes, has had profound effects on our nation and our people. We haven't maintained our infrastructure, let alone modernized it. We haven't sufficiently supported public research and development to ensure that America will maintain its technological edge. We haven't embraced the investments in education and training that we need to keep up with technological change and to compete in the international marketplace as we once did. And we haven't built support systems for families to improve child health, education, and well-being, and provide adequate child care. That's why the President proposed the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan. These policies will promote a dynamic economy with greater opportunity for workers, higher living standards, and over time, reduced inequality. Public investments not only create good jobs, they also increase the value of our existing resources. The Jobs Plan proposes a range of productivity and profitability boosting public investments, totaling $2.2 trillion over the coming 10 years, about 0.75% of GDP. That's a large number, but an achievable one. The Jobs Plan will build and modernize physical infrastructure like bridges and roads, but there will also be investments in an infrastructure for the future: broadband, research and development, public transportation, modernized schools, and a more expansive network of childcare providers. We know that, like any private sector investment, the payoff to any one infrastructure project is uncertain. But what we propose is a portfolio of public investments that together will have a significant positive payoff directly to the American people, to workers and entrepreneurs, whether in convenience, connectivity, educational opportunity, productivity, or business efficiency. Alongside the Jobs Plan, we are proposing to fundamentally reform the corporate tax system that will help offset the cost of the proposed public investments. With corporate taxes at an historical low of 1% of GDP, we believe the corporate sector can contribute to this effort by bearing its fair share. We propose simply to return the corporate tax toward historical norms. At the same time, we want to eliminate incentives that reward corporations for moving their operations overseas and shifting profits to low-tax countries. As part of this effort, we're working with our international partners on a global minimum corporate tax to stop the race to the bottom. We're confident that the investments and tax proposals in the Jobs Plan, taken as a package, will enhance the net profitability of our corporations and improve their global competitiveness. And we hope business leaders will see it this way and support the Jobs Plan. The third problem is that we've failed to meet the looming threat of climate change, and we risk falling behind in the race for new low-carbon technologies. We know that climate change poses an existential threat, but we also know it presents an historic economic opportunity for those companies, industries, and countries that seize the mantle of leadership and drive the transition to a global low-carbon economy. Unfortunately, in recent years, the federal government largely ignored the problem while ceding economic leadership to other countries. For example, solar and wind are already the fastest growing segments of the global energy market, but China's taken the lead in both and is racing ahead in developing battery storage technologies as well. Our disadvantage deepened over the last 4 years with our exit from the Paris Agreement, the removal of dozens of important environmental protections, and our underinvestment in technologies of the future. We're now less prepared than we ought to be for the increasingly frequent and deadly impacts of climate-related weather events, and less equipped to lead the global economic transformation underway. This administration is acting and will make up for lost time. The American Jobs Plan responds to the climate change challenge by investing in new energy infrastructure and supporting research and development that will incentivize innovation in renewable energy technologies. We also need to protect our energy infrastructure against malicious cyber threats. The transition to a greener economy will provide a multi-decade boost to the economy, creating jobs along the way as the private sector participates in the development of new technologies, new investments, and the new products that will drive the global economic transformation. And finally, the fourth problem is the absence of attention to the long-standing impediments and inequities that limit opportunities for social mobility and make everyday life more challenging for many Americans. Workers, particularly lower wage earners, have seen wage growth stagnate over several decades, despite overall rising productivity and national income. There are several contributors to this troubling trend, but one important factor is an erosion in labor's bargaining power. This partly reflects a decline in unionization and the real minimum wage, along with a marked increase in outsourcing, both domestically and globally. Moreover, a large share of the growth in labor income that has occurred is accrued to the top 10% of workers in the wage distribution. These trends have resulted in growing inequality and divergence in wealth, a preservation of the racial wealth gap and a hollowing out of the middle class. Combined with rising costs for childcare and health care, increased work stress, and riskier retirements without pensions, we've seen a widening in gaps in measures of well-being, such as life expectancies, deaths from suicide and drug overdoses, and social isolation. The Biden administration has crafted the American Families Plan to address the troubling trend of rising inequality by providing a strong foundation for opportunity and inclusion. The Families Plan proposes major investments in education, childcare, and the care economy. As recent research shows, investments in early childhood education is one of the highest paying long-term investments we can make. Over time, it will produce payoffs that far exceed the initial costs. The Families Plan also aims to provide people the support they need to be effective employees while fulfilling their responsibilities at home. Investment in early childhood care can be an important determinant of labor force participation, one of the key drivers of economic growth. Paid leave, similarly, can support increased labor force participation. Expanding these programs is a critical step in reversing the ongoing divergence in labor force participation rates in our country versus other developed countries. In addition, a versatile education system that's closely tied to local labor markets should be a cornerstone of any 21st century public investment program. And that begins with our commitment to making community college free for every American. The plan also contains a series of meaningful expansions in the Earned Income Tax Credit, the Child Tax Credit, and the Child Independent Care Tax Credit that will collectively provide greater economic security to workers and families who have too often not felt the benefits of economic growth in decades past. All told, the Families Plan will transform our fight against childhood poverty and provide unprecedented support to low-income and middle-class families. The American Families Plan will be paid for by a series of tax reforms that ensure that wealthy individuals are paying their fair share, and we seek to address the rise in tax evasion, which has stacked the deck for decades against responsible and compliant taxpayers. The initiatives I just outlined are necessary to reshape the American economy, maintain our strong contribution to the global economy, and continue American leadership in the future. Of course, our well-being is inextricably linked to the fortunes of the rest of the world, for better or worse. A prosperous and stable global economy will bolster U.S. economic growth and job creation, as consumers around the world will want to buy American goods made by American workers. Treasury is working closely with our international partners as we continue to fight the pandemic and ensure strong global growth, mitigate the worst effects on the world's poorest countries, and tackle generational global issues like climate change. Yet there's a growing risk of fragmentation of the global economy, evidenced by market-driven regionalization and the rise of regional global value chains. America needs to have a strong presence in global markets. We will fight for a level playing field for trade and investment, and we will confront adversaries who take advantage by ignoring or abusing rules and norms of behavior. At the same time, we should embrace competition abroad as we embrace it at home. Let others innovate and advance. Let us seek to advance faster and further. We ultimately benefit from the positive spillovers of innovation wherever it occurs. As in any competition, if you lose one contest, you work harder to win the next. The better the competition, the stronger you will get. That has been the American way. To conclude, it's time to recommit our government to playing a more active and smarter role in the economy. The administration's planned actions are not fiscal stimulus in the way we've seen in the past, nor are they intended to target a particular size of government. Rather, we're proposing smart investments to make our economy more competitive and sustainable, to provide opportunities for all families and workers, and to make our tax system fairer. So let us think big. Let us redouble our efforts to create opportunity, social mobility, and ultimately widespread and sustainable prosperity now and for our children's children. In the hit musical, as Alexander Hamilton approached death, he ponders the question, what is a legacy? He answers, it's planting seeds in a garden you never get to see. Well, let's build back better together and build something that lasts for generations. We Americans deserve a better deal. Thank you.
It's always an honor to hear from the Treasury Secretary, including and maybe even especially when we disagree, as we do on taxes. The data and the evidence are clear. The proposed tax increases would greatly disadvantage U.S. businesses and harm American workers. And now is certainly not the time to erect new barriers to economic recovery. The administration is right to champion infrastructure, and we want to be there with them to do that, but there are other ways to finance it. Our recovery, of course, also depends on how well we tackle the pandemic itself. For more on this, we turn to a discussion on pandemic crisis management.
Good morning. My name is Michael Carney. I'm the Senior Vice President of Emerging Issues at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation. We have been working to defeat COVID-19 since early 2020. That work continues today in the United States and around the world through the Global Task Force on Pandemic Response. I'm honored today to welcome two distinguished guests who represent the broad collaboration that's allowed us to make so much progress against this deadly disease. You may know Andy Slavitt from his appearances at the regular COVID-19 briefings from the White House. He is a veteran of business and public service who is now helping lead the United States response to the pandemic. From the private sector, we have Dave Clark, the CEO of Amazon's worldwide consumer business. Dedicated Amazonians have kept us fed and supplied, even in the darkest days of the pandemic. Amazon was an early leader in workplace COVID-19 testing and is now hosting vaccination clinics for employees and communities, an important contribution to our collective efforts to vaccinate America. Thanks to both of you for taking the time to join us for today's discussion about how the United States has gotten back on track. We're clearly not out of the woods. COVID anywhere is COVID everywhere, but conditions have improved in recent months. This is thanks to the continued vigilance of the American people and the unprecedented partnership between government and industry that enabled us to do things like bring new vaccines and therapeutics to market. So Andy, thanks for joining us. I'll throw the first question to you. How confident are you in the recovery? And is the worst behind us, or is the White House concerned about future surges like we saw in the winter?
Well, thanks very much for having me and having us on, and it's great to be with Dave. Look forward to this conversation. Look, I think we've had a spate of good news, and as with bad news in this pandemic, good news in this pandemic comes exponentially as well. So when you vaccinate a lot of people, cases shrink pretty rapidly. In the last 2 weeks, cases have shrunk 30%. We now have very good data that the vaccines not only work in labs, but they work in real life. We have good data that the vaccines are effective against the variants. Credit to our scientists and years of research. Now, everything's not solved. There are, as we all know, a set of challenges ahead of us. There's a set of Americans who are still considering whether they want to get vaccinated, and much of our recovery will depend on how they decide. But importantly, I think we need to respect people's processes, respect the fact that people who haven't gotten vaccinated yet, many of them have questions that they need answers to. Many of them want to see what happened with the vaccinations that went before them. So if you've been vaccinated, talk to people, tell them what the experience was like, have them talk to their doctors, have them talk to their pharmacists, help them understand why it's important, but respect the fact that people need to make their own decisions. We also have to make vaccinations easier. And then I think, as I'm sure we will talk about, our job is not done even if we end up being successful in the U.S. Many of you have friends, colleagues, families, and operations across the world, and understand what a fortunate position the U.S. is in to have these vaccines available to us at a time when people around the world are going through really difficult challenges. And the U.S. has got to take its leadership role seriously and step up and help with that too.
So Dave, it's hard to believe that it's only been a year or a little bit more than a year since the pandemic began. But back then, as we went into lockdown, your company became a critical service for much of the country. How did you react to the giant disruptions in supply chains, but also find ways to keep employees safe?
Well, first, let me say I'm really happy to be here with you and Andy today, and I'm really grateful for the leadership of the Biden administration over the last few months and setting some audacious goals for getting the country vaccinated and the progress we're on there. As Andy said, there's some real light at the end of the tunnel there that I'm excited about. I really want to thank Michael, you and Suzanne and the whole team, as well at the U.S. Chamber, who have also done a fantastic job over the last year supporting business in the U.S. and helping sort of around the world, companies and people deal with the pandemic and the challenges that everybody's faced for the last year. You're right to talk about the supply chain disruption. I mean, it's really, we've never seen anything like it. I can't think of anything in my sort of professional life that's disrupted as broadly as this did, from everything from the customer front to where and how people can leave their home and where they can shop, all the way back to the manufacturing source points, whether that be in the U.S. or anywhere around the world. I think we all learn just how interconnected we are as a society and a global society, and what happens in one country and in one part of the world, how it impacts all the rest of us. And we've been, I think, as businesses around the world and Amazon have been dealing with that and working to get supply chain disruption repaired and back in place for consumers over the last year, and continue to work through that. And I think will for some time. Our initial challenge was we were faced with unprecedented demand. All of a sudden you have this mix of customers who can't leave their home, and everybody needs things delivered and wants things delivered so they can stay safe. And we're trying to balance that with how do we also keep our own workforce safe. We have the second largest workforce in the U.S., over 800,000 people, and most of those folks need to come to work every day to do their jobs. And we had to pivot quickly to how do we change hundreds of processes and put socially distanced social distancing into our facilities and trying to source, daily masks and PPE for, almost 1 million people to operate every day. And so every aspect of our company pivoted to be able to address those. You mentioned it, but maybe one of the most important pieces of that was actually testing and building out. We had a great partnership with government agencies to help support that and build out our own internal testing labs, which have now tested millions of employees in the U.S. and abroad to help help us spot where we were having challenges and help catch things early, given how many asymptomatic cases there actually were, and to prevent the spread in our workplaces. And we're now pivoting. As we see this great work in vaccines, we're pivoting that work into on-site vaccination clinics and vaccination processes for our local communities and our employees. And we're excited about that and what that means for our workforce and for our communities as we go forward. So.
Just a quick follow-up on vaccines, because that's definitely the path back to public health. When we think about work sites, is there anything else that we should be doing to ensure that essential workers have access to vaccines, both here and abroad? It's come up, with a number of companies that they're very eager to ensure that their employees have access to these safe and effective vaccines.
Well, we've been in this place of, so many of our employees have been coming to work for the fullness of the pandemic, and you have this. There's a lot of folks who have been ready and willing and supercharged to go out and get the vaccine. But there's another population that is looking at it like, I've been coming to work. There's some hesitancy there. And when we talk to people, we saw that. And that's why we moved to get on site. We did these public-private partnerships and partnerships with other entities to help us come on site to vaccinate our teams. We do on site now at over 250 locations around the U.S. And we see substantive increases, double-digit 20+% increases in the amount of people who immediately start to go get vaccinated when we can just simply remove the friction relative to having to leave, having to go to another location to do it. We also see that people adding some incentive helped. We put in an $80 payment to people who get vaccinated, $40 for each round of the shot, or $80 sort of total, plus some unpaid time off to people, trying to give people opportunity to, if they were worried about, how they might feel with the vaccine, give them flexibility to manage it. And we found that was very well received. And then I think the guidance we just got from the CDC is big. This ability to be able to be, if you've been vaccinated, to not wear a mask indoors, and how safe you are as a vaccinated individual, I think is going to go a long way to helping reduce hesitancy.
Not surprisingly, Dave's hit on a lot of the right and successful points. Here's what we know from data that just, I think, supports a lot of what Dave just said. First of all, the number one thing that employees say is getting in the way for them to getting a vaccine is paid time off. So you might say, well, gosh, that's easier for larger employers to do, but at a small employer, it's hard. And it is harder because you rely on each person. But the federal government has put forward, as the chamber knows, and as many of you know, a tax credit for giving paid time off to people when they go get their vaccination. And if they feel like they're going to feel a little bit under the weather afterwards. We don't want anybody to feel like they've got to lose an hour of pay. And a lot of people are worried about that. I think particularly in the Hispanic, Latinx population, if you have Hispanic employees, communicating with them, letting them know they're eligible, giving them the time off, letting them know that there are resources in Spanish. Number two, I'd say is I think it's a good thing to talk about at the workplace. It's a good thing because, people don't. Here's a shocker for everybody. People don't necessarily want to hear from the government about a topic like this. They may or may not trust what they hear from the government or even the CDC. People do trust the people they know, and they trust the people they respect locally. They trust their colleagues and coworkers. They trust the medical officer if there's one in their company. They trust the local hospital, their doctors, their physicians. Encourage people to talk to people they know and to talk to people who've been vaccinated, because this is just people doing their homework. Let's not think of them as reluctant. Let's not even put a label on them. Let's just say that their decision-making process is such that they want to know some things before they make this decision. And so make that okay. Provide them that information. And I think more people will make the right choice because these are very effective and safe vaccines. And and then removing every obstacle possible. We now have most places you go have walk-in appointments. So it's much, much easier. And people remember these horror stories from January and February where you had to get through like 7 websites and other things. It's not that way any longer. And let them know that.
So Andy, let's build on what you just were talking about, because that tracks with everything that we know. One of the other things that we've seen in recent research is you can help overcome any hesitancy in the workforce by making it as convenient as possible for people to get the shot. So this week, I think the White House announced that jurisdictions are going to get 28 million doses. 2/3 of them are going to go to the states. We know that, again, from research, that worksite vaccine clinics can increase willingness to get the shot. Do you think that we'll ever reach a point at which the federal government will help allocate doses to large employers, or that we'll see increased emphasis on worksite vaccine clinics? Or do you expect all of that to remain with states and localities?
So my answer is yes and yes. In that, number one, we do think that both on-site and near-site clinics are effective for exactly the reason you just said. We also think, as we studied this, we asked ourselves the question, who's most efficient at doing those? Is it the federal government or the state government? And we determined that by and large, it's the states. The states are going to be much better at it because they know their employer size and sites. That there aren't that many. If the country was filled with only multi-site, multi-state employers, like Amazon, it would be one thing. But for most people are within a single state. Most states have an abundance of vaccines. So I think if you got a hold of the public health officer or the vaccination effort in those states, whether you're in multiple states or whether you're just in one state, I think that's going to be successful. And the work we did suggested that states are actually doing a lot of on-site and near-site. Now, I have one more suggestion for you, in that I've talked with both CVS and Walmart and Walgreens and others, and many of them will provide a partnership. They will either come on site, they'll create special hours, they'll come nearby, they'll bring a car or van. So if you feel like, gosh, if we had near site or on site, we could do more vaccinations. My suggestion is to connect to one of the big pharmacies nearby, and they can correct me if they disagree. But I think many of them will be happy to figure out how to make it more convenient for your employees.
Yeah, I just reiterate that. We've seen the same thing. States incredibly cooperative in participating with on-site events, and we've partnered with a number of different organizations and pharmacies to help us do those on-site vaccines, and it's worked fantastic. So I encourage other companies to do the same.
So shifting gears for a minute away from vaccines to testing, it's something that we struggled with early on in the pandemic. At first, we didn't have enough capacity and we weren't testing a broad enough group of people. Now we have robust testing capacity. I mean, I saw one estimate that it's somewhere around 500 million a month, maybe. But fewer people are electing to get tested. So Amazon was a leader in worksite testing. Are there lessons that you learned through that process that we can use either in a governmental way or other companies can learn from as we look at the next stages of the pandemic? And do you see testing as something that your company is going to continue with, even though vaccines are widely available?
Yeah, it's a great question. We did testing in particular in the early days, and I would say not even early, all the way up till now, has been an integral part of our overall safety protocols and creating a very easy, efficient way for people to do testing on site. I think, one of the big takeaways, I would think, if I were writing an after action on what to do, what we learned from this pandemic, one of the things that I would take is, how do we spin up testing industry and broad testing capabilities in one of these kind of events faster? Because we found it so important to our processes that I can't imagine sort of having done the last 9 months without it. It's so important to be able to catch, particularly asymptomatic cases in individuals early in the process before they have a chance. It's where you get a chance to catch it before it spreads. It's putting the fire out before it really starts. And that has been incredibly important. I think as far as how do we go from here with testing, we continue to test, and we expect we will for the foreseeable future. Again, as Andy said, people will, majority of people I think are going to, get vaccinated, and while others continue to investigate and understand their personal approach to vaccination, testing provides an opportunity to continue to see what's happening with COVID in our workplace in the months ahead. I think you'll see that the testing quantity reduce because, as the vaccinated population grows, fewer and fewer people who are vaccinated will feel the need, or have the need to be tested. And more of the testing will focus in on people who have chosen for whatever personal reason not to be vaccinated at this point.
So, Andy, when you think about testing, what kind of messages do you want people to walk away with? Do we want people to still aggressively make use of public testing facilities now that vaccines are everywhere? Like, what's the current thinking from the administration about testing?
Well, look, one thing that encourages me is the coming availability of low-cost, take-home, and point-of-care tests. Because I think people with a little bit more information, having a stronger sense of whether or not they're infectious or not is the kind of information people are looking for. And so there's going to be an ongoing need. Remember, kids under 12 aren't yet able to be tested. People with cancer aren't able to be tested yet. We don't know how long these vaccines work for. So, we should be moving to say, hey, let's flip the switch off and forget the pandemic ever happened. We're still going through this. A lot of people are at risk. We still have hundreds of people a day dying, which is horrifying. That we're even comforted that it's lower, but still, it's quite high by any other standard. So, knowing whether you're infectious, which I think is what the use case is. I'm going to go into the workplace. I'm going to go to church. I'm going to go to a ball game. Do I want to know if I'm infectious? That's going to be something that, because unlike the flu, right, your body tells you you're infectious when you have the flu. With COVID, your body doesn't always tell you you're infectious before you know it plenty of times. So that's why it's useful. I think there's two other kinds of testing that will remain important. One is surveillance testing that states and local government are going to have to continue to do, and we'll do that in more and more clever ways, wastewater and other non-invasive things to say, hey, you know what, this community is got growing risk. That'll be important. And then, of course, there'll be the traditional testing that you'll get, what people now know as the PCR testing, although I bet no one on the phone, including me, can quite say what PCR stands for. So we will have those needs. I think they will become baked in part of the infrastructure. And Dave's exactly right. We had to turn a bespoke industry into a scale industry in the middle of a pandemic. Let's not do that again. Let's get there beforehand.
I don't think we would disagree with that. So, Dave, now that we're moving closer toward a post-pandemic America, fingers crossed, what are some of the challenges that a company like Amazon faces when we think about whatever normal looks like? And is there anything that the Biden administration or other governments can be doing to support the recovery of the economy?
Yeah, when we started talking about how much disruption and how much change and how challenging it was at the beginning to get set up and get in a place to keep our people safe for the pandemic. And I thought that was pretty hard and challenging. And I think maybe unwinding may be as challenging and more challenging. Just we've spent so much time ingraining these behavioral things like masks and social distancing. And we've been in this very intense situation for a long time that, getting people, moving people out of this back into normalcy is going to be challenging. And particularly in a mix where you have an increasing population of people who are vaccinated, but a group who has not been vaccinated yet. I'm very encouraged. One, I'm excited about the goals the Biden administration has set. I think this goal of 70% by July 4th is a big deal, and a big deal for the country, and something we should all be, running towards and figuring out how we help support and accomplish. And I think the announcement recently by the CDC that enables people to get, who have been vaccinated, it says that you can basically remove your mask indoors and out and be in a relative safe position. I think that's a big announcement, a big change. When I talk to folks in our workforce, I hear a lot of comments like, well, why bother to get, they haven't been working from home for a year. They've been coming to work. And, if I have to keep wearing a mask, if I have to keep social distancing, why do I need to go get the vaccine right now? Why bother? And I think this, following the science and getting the announcements out and continuing to move forward with the safety of the vaccine and this miracle that these companies have created for us with these vaccines, I'm grateful to the companies who have done this and the governments and individuals who have distributed. The path that they've given us forward here is truly a miracle, and it's kind of brilliant. But people needed to see and hear that it was actually a path forward. There was concern, and as Andy said, people researching and trying to figure out what their life was going to be like post-vaccine. And I think as that picture becomes clearer, you're going to see more and more people, I hope, shift and go take the vaccine. And the announcements from the CDC are a good example of that. We communicated that message out to all 800,000 plus of our employees on the afternoon of the announcement, because we wanted people to hear it. We wanted people to know it. We wanted people to use that as a lever to start really pushing it to get more appointments faster for vaccines so we can hit the goals that we all have. And so I think we're going to quickly work in our work environment to figure out how we enable our teams to take advantage of the new freedoms and the return to sort of normalcy of being vaccinated. And how do we do that? And how do we enable the people who have, for whatever personal reason, taken the personal responsibility on themselves to not get vaccinated, but they're going to manage their own situation in some other way? How do we enable them and the vaccinated population to work together is going to be a challenge that I'm hopeful we see some coordinated sort of communication guidance and work from all the various governmental organizations at the state and federal level.
So a question for both of you, as we think toward the future and we're optimistic, what should the role of industry be as we try and build back better?
Well, I'll start. Look, I think, let me just start with this on a personal level. January 20th, I got here in the White House. Almost from the day one, people all across the country called and said one thing: how can I help? Dave and Amazon were among those, the chamber itself, many businesses. And I wish Americans could have heard that call, because I just got this real sense that people are like, hey, we are all in this together. Let us know what we can do. And almost every time I talked to somebody, the answer was yes. Hey, we could use help here. We need help thinking about this. Yes. People shared their ideas and their opinions, of course. That's helpful too. But it's very clear that this recovery belongs to the American public. This recovery belongs to the businesses, the other institutions in our country. It doesn't work unless everybody works through this together. And I think the same will be true for the recovery. We have to acknowledge that among the things lost were not only people's lives, but businesses that people had put their entire family into for decades that may have been lost overnight. And those are real losses. So I think this spirit of building back better means supporting people, individuals and businesses, as they get their legs under them. It means, and I think the American Rescue Plan and the two pieces of coming legislation on infrastructure and on supporting families are critical to that, and businesses can help support that along the way, along the process. And continuing to be understanding and modeling being understanding of one another. Dave said something which just struck me, because I think it's so true, which is how habits are difficult to break in any direction. And it's very easy for someone to say, hey, we just said no mask wearing. Why are you wearing a mask? Just as it's easy to say, people are supposed to be wearing masks. Why aren't you wearing a mask? And this whole notion of judging one another and side eye, et cetera. But For our society to build back better, I think it's really about us saying, we're going to go at our own, people are going to go at their own pace. This is not going to be dictated, driven by the government. Increasingly, the decisions on how fast we build back are going to be yours to make. Government will do its best to provide guidance and indeed regulate the things that are appropriate to be regulated, whether it's a state or other levels. But that's not going to be the norm as we move out of this pandemic. Keeping each other safe is all of our responsibility.
Yeah, I just add that, I think this is well said. I think what happened and what continues to happen is bigger than, it's bigger than any individual company. It's bigger than Amazon. It's bigger than any individual company. And I think, all these companies are just big collections of people. And, I think we've all faced this together, whether it be, citizens of the US, and we're all pulling whatever resources we have to help support each other through this, to being citizens of the world. I mean, even right now, India is struggling with an incredible challenge. And I know the US Chamber and all the businesses it represents, along with us, and lots of other companies are bringing everything they can to bear to support India, and what has been a, devastating new surge of cases. And I think one of the things I'm hopeful for here, and maybe this sounds a little pie in the sky, but I'm hopeful that one of the things we all learned here, or we'll take away from this, is that really we are all connected globally, and not just in the U.S. but also globally, and that all these companies and big organizations and big groups of people can, when working together and challenged with big objectives, can come together and can figure things out, can solve these problems, and can sort of really deliver sort of some fundamental miracles, like vaccines and in record time, and the kinds of humanity that we've seen from people around the world, big and small, has been. I think there's some real gifts out of this that over the course of time maybe we can take and channel into a way to continue to figure out these public-private partnerships. How do we make them better? How do we make them bigger? How do we tackle the big challenges facing us, whether it be the pandemic or climate change? I think it's going to take a mix of these public-private partnerships and people at all levels working together to figure out how to solve these enormous challenges that are in front of us.
So Dave's mention of India brings me to a question for you, Andy. So we expect the U.S. to begin accumulating a significant number of excess doses of the vaccine, probably, or at least according to the estimates I've seen, starting in June. When do you expect the United States to be in a strong enough position to share some of its surplus vaccines with countries like India or other international partners, that are suffering, at this stage of the pandemic?
So unfortunately, this could be my last question. But I so appreciate the time, and I so appreciate each of you out there and what you've done. We have, as we get into better shape here, as more people get vaccinated here, and as soon as the FDA proves that we can begin moving doses overseas as we have already, 10% of the doses that we bought for ourselves are going to go overseas by the 4th of July. And we're going to be net exporters. We're building factories here, creating jobs here, exporting vaccines to the globe. And that's both an important humanitarian thing to do. It's a good business thing to do. It's a good public health thing to do. So with that, I'm going to unfortunately have to say I've got to run, but I so appreciated being with everybody today.
Well, thank you to Andy Slavitt and Dave Clark for joining us today. I'm going to throw out what I was going to say at the end of this, and I'm actually just going to quote something that Andy said earlier. We're all in this together. Let us know how we can help. Thank you for joining us today, and thank you for all the work that all of the businesses have been doing to help vaccinate America. Have a good day. Be well.
What a great panel. We're so grateful to Amazon and to the White House and to our own Mike Carney for really helping us think about public-private partnerships and what they can accomplish kind of in this time. So now we'll move on to another public-private partnership. The U.S. Chamber has been really proud to facilitate some discussions and actions to leverage the strengths of private industry and our government to shape the path forward. We know that there is this need for private sector leadership globally, and it's why we have, in partnership with the Business Roundtable, launched a global task force on the pandemic response, as I mentioned in my opening earlier. The sponsors of this forum, Amazon, Google, and UPS, are on the steering committee of the task force, and we're grateful to their CEOs for the key role that they have played in this effort. Altogether, it's leadership of more than 50 companies involved in this initiative that have resulted in 1,000 ventilators set to be delivered in India by June 3rd, 25,000 oxygen concentrators set for delivery in the coming weeks, and importantly, the creation of a network of human resource officers and leaders who can share ideas and information to help the people of India. So here to talk about this global task force today are three leaders who have really been at the heart of this unprecedented mobilization of the business community since the start. We have with us Julie Sweet, the CEO of Accenture, Arvind Krishna, the chairman and CEO of IBM, and Brad Smith, the president of Microsoft. So we certainly have a lot we want to ask them, so let's dive right in. Julie, let me start with you. Can you explain what the Global Task Force is and how it came about?
Sure, great. Thanks, Suzanne, and thanks for having us today. So first of all, let me start with what is at the heart of the Global Task Force. And at the heart of the task force are the three C's: connection, commitment, and collective action. And it's the connection of the U.S. health and economic security to resolution of the global pandemic crisis. It is about commitment for U.S. companies to protect the health and safety of its own employees everywhere in the world, but also our longstanding tradition of a commitment to be a force for good in the countries where we operate around the world. And finally, it's about the power of collective action. It is taking the basic principles that we each operate under: focus, scale, diversity of experience and thought, and bringing together the private sector to work on these big problems and to work with governments. And so as you think about the Global Task Force, remembering connection, commitment, and collective action really helps you understand what our priorities are and how we'll move forward. I want to take you back to the weekend of April 23rd. It was a Friday, and my own leadership team and I were looking at alarming statistics coming from India. Literally in 1 week, our COVID cases had increased 160%. The news was reporting a surge that we now know is the deadliest and the fastest since the pandemic began. Several phone calls the next day to other companies, including Brad and Arvind. Was clear this was a collective experience. And by Sunday, we had almost 20 CEOs on a call. And those three C's were exactly what we talked about. And then in the coming days after that, it grew to over 50 companies. All of us, not one single company, committed to lead and to say, how can we have this collective action in order to make sure that we're both protecting the health and economic security of the U.S., our own employees, helping the humanitarian crisis, and doing so at speed. You just heard from Dave and Andy the power of the public-private partnership in our own country. And this was a huge lesson for all of us. And that was the mindset that each of the CEOs brought together. But we also saw unprecedented collective action during the pandemic among pharma companies, for example, to solve both the creation of vaccines, but also the manufacturing. And it is these models that we said we now need to turn to the global pandemic, and India being at the heart of not only this unprecedented surge, but the reminder of how critical resolving the global crisis is. And I know Brad and Arvind are going to get into it more, but in terms of just as you think about our health and economic security, the generic drugs that we each take, 1 in 3 is produced there. 60% of the world's vaccines are in India. Parts of the cars that we drive, the banking transactions when you go to your ATM are helped facilitated by advanced IT services. There isn't really a part of our individual American lives that is not touched in some way by the deep partnership that we've had with India for decades. And just as they were there for us at the beginning of the pandemic, we also want to be there for them from a humanitarian perspective. So that's how the task force came about. It's what we're committed, the 3 C's are what we're all about. And what I'm probably most inspired by is just how everyone has rolled up their sleeves. This is about a collective group of CEOs and government leaders, not one single company.
Thank you for that, Julie. I remember that Sunday, and one of the things that stuck in my mind was the CEO who was wearing the "Science Will Win" t-shirt, which I thought was so fantastic. So let me bring Arvind into the conversation, and maybe you could describe for the audience here what the task force activities on the ground in India look like. How is this mobilization impacting people of India right now?
Thanks, Suzanne. So look, first of all, we must all acknowledge the immensity of the crisis that is going on in India and what we must all do. It's our responsibility as members of the community to go help as much as we can. And Julie spoke of that. It's also important to reinforce the critical nature of the business relationship on both sides, because the impact on all of us as citizens and consumers will be immense. Now, that said, what the task force did was we collectively get a lot of feedback from our employees and our leaders in India. They are also in touch with the different state leaders as well as the central government leaders about the Prime Minister's task force on COVID. From that, we got the feedback of a number of essential items. While vaccines is much more in the purview of government, and I'll come back to that in a moment, of 3 items that they all said they need and they wanted our collective action on. One is the oxygen supply chain. And Suzanne, you mentioned a couple of things, but I'll add some more detail on that. The second is around hospital and access to medical care. And the third is the sharing of best practices. So this wasn't top down or theoretical. This is based on actual needs that our employees and their families all wanted. First, on oxygen. Now, you spoke of the ventilators. Medtronic has already agreed to supply 1,000 ventilators. These have been procured. 100 of them are on the ground, more are on the way. But this includes an end-to-end training so they can go into hospitals and be effective. The 25,000 concentrators you spoke of, 5,000 are on the ground, and all 25,000 are intended to be on the ground by the end of May. And these, together with the Red Cross and the Indian government, are being distributed to the points in need. Just for the audience to understand, there isn't enough capacity in India to get oxygen from the point of creation to the point of consumption. Concentrators alleviates that issue, albeit in a temporary way, while more oxygen creating plants are being produced. Hospital beds, how we all collectively act, working with in-country medical facilities to create more capacity, is the second big collective action that this group has taken. And all of our CHROs, our human resource officers, have gotten together to share best practices, including telehealth, monitoring, home health kits, increasing insurance coverages, making sure that elder care is taken care of, a variety of actions, all collectively. Much as I'm really proud of the speed at which we brought our resources to bear, Julie references that Sunday call. If I recall, Julie, by the end of that call, within 30 minutes, I think collectively, I forget how many, over $10 million was raised. People committed on the spot. No bureaucracy, no action, no going back to boards and committees to get moving. And then a number of us stood by and said, okay, we'll act as backstops to put resources, including people, actions, websites, all to bear, and including people getting together in India to act on these topics. Now, all this said, Suzanne, it would be remiss of me not to say, none of us can marshal the resources that the US government could bring to bear. And so we are also working with the US government to get them to bring their immense resources to bear to help alleviate this crisis.
I was going to go around the table, but since you just said that, let me ask you to follow up a second question, which is really the task force has been working, as you just said, with the U.S. government, but also with the Indian government. So what are, Arvind, let you keep the microphone and tell us, what are the main messages that the task force has been conveying on both sides?
Thanks, Suzanne. So we met with the Indian External Affairs Minister, Jaishankar. We have also spoken to Ambassador Sandhu. We have also individually, I know many of us on the task force have spoken to different members of the Indian government. What they have conveyed is, one, they are acknowledging the immensity of the crisis. What they speak of is they would like a lot of help on a number of topics. If you remember, the first topic that came up was vaccine production. Julie talked about vaccine production in India, and they need the supply chain to be opened up. And they have mentioned that, and that is work that hopefully with the announcements yesterday and over the past week from the White House, with what Jake Sullivan as well as Samantha Power have agreed to, hopefully a lot of that will open up. Not just manufactured vaccines, but the ability to manufacture vaccines in India. The two items of immediate need that they all want is oxygen, and the next is therapeutics. And those are things that the Indian government has asked for. But what I got back, Suzanne, which is incredible, is that they have helped shortcut the red tape. As many of our folks in the supply chain industry, Federal Express, United Airlines, DHL, we all know that distribution within the country can often take much longer than any of us would like. And so speaking with the government officials, what they have done is really helped, I'll call it, shortcut is the wrong word, but expedite landing on the ground and trying to get these critical supplies to the point of most need has been a huge help. They've also helped a lot with trying to get access to different medical care for our people in the country. So those are things that I think have been very positive. But the biggest is their ability to want to coordinate with the US private sector, and looking at us to also help coordinate with the US government has been areas which I think is maybe a first for the government of India.
Thank you for that. You know, Brad, Julie mentioned that first call, and one thing I remember from that call, besides the T-shirt, which I already mentioned, was your idea right from the very beginning that this had to be a global task force, that it was going to have to think about reach beyond India. Can you describe why the task force had that impetus really from the beginning?
Well, sure. And thank you, Susanna. And I think even from that first call, I mean, the leadership of Julie and Arvind and the involvement of Accenture and IBM has been of just, such critical importance. I think it does require a recognition that this isn't going to be isolated to India, and we need to act around the world. One of the things that I think is insightful but sobering is just frankly the parallels between what we're seeing today and what we saw in the 1918 influenza a century ago. In that incident, 500,000 people died in the United States, about 15 million people died in India, about 50 million people died globally. And what it really reflected is the fact that the infection then, like today, spread around the world, and it caused the most deaths when it overwhelmed the healthcare capacity of a nation. And that is exactly what is at stake right now. And the good news is I think we have three assets that we can bring to bear in the 21st century that didn't exist at that time. The first is we have real-time data on a really unparalleled basis. And that enables us both to see and then to predict that this is going to lead to other hotspots. It already has, whether it's a Peru or a Brazil, and we're going to see this continue, we should assume, at least over the next year. The second thing we have today is a global supply chain, really at an extraordinary level. And the companies that are participating in the task force are at the heart of that supply chain. So it is this ability to secure oxygen-related equipment, buy it where it is being produced, and ship it by air with chamber and task force members to the countries where it's needed. And the third thing we have is people on the ground pretty much everywhere. You see that in the CHROs. You see it on employees who can volunteer locally. You see it in employees in Washington, D.C. who can help forge a connection with the federal government in the United States. So the need is global and our capability is global. And that's why I think it's this combination of connection and commitment, a commitment that ultimately I think is really about saving lives around the world.
Let me, again, while you have the microphone, and then I've got another question for Julie. Let me double down on that for a second, Brad. So do you think that this task force is learning lessons, creating a playbook that will, I mean, we're talking about the global economic recovery as well as the health recovery at this forum today. Do you think this playbook and these lessons learned are a key part of that?
I think the answer is a resounding yes. And I think we need to focus on job one, which is saving lives that are at stake with COVID around the world. But I believe we're developing a new capability as a country to help marshal humanitarian assistance where it's needed around the world. I was at the White House last Wednesday, and one of the things that people noted is they had never seen the business community respond as quickly and as impactfully as it has since that first call that Julie mentioned last month. And that's because of all of these capabilities that we now have. The last thing we should do is apply this here and then set them aside and forget them. And what we should recognize, I believe, is that we're also discovering how the public sector and private sector, in fact, complement each other. As Arvind said, we will never match the United States government for, say, the amount of resources that can be tapped and then moved so quickly. But we also have resources that the government doesn't have. We have more people on the ground. Our people on the ground are really part of the local community in a way that, say, typically a United States government employee is not. We've got the data, we've got the supply chain. One of the things that people in the government have noted is we had access to supplies that they would have never known about. So if we can really sort out what we can each uniquely contribute and how we can each organize ourselves and then coordinate together, this is something that I think can do good for the world and advance really the role of the business community, not just in the United States, but globally.
Could not agree more. You mentioned people on the ground, and that's actually where I wanted to go with Julie for a minute. Julie, from the beginning, you've brought in a real human side of what's happening on the ground in India, how heartbreaking it is. And a number of the CEOs on the task force are dealing with their own workforces on the ground there and trying to help the families stay safe and stay healthy, and also the communities in which they operate. So can you talk a little bit about that specific challenge as a CEO?
Yes, thanks for the question. I want to make sure to recognize, though, as I begin, the role of the U.S. India Business Council, the USIBC, and the US ISPF, the India Strategic Partnership Forum. Because when we think about the collective action and also people on the ground, we've really benefited so greatly from the deep partnerships and the knowledge that you have. And we could not have moved as a private sector as quickly as we have without the USIBC and the US ISPF. And I think that's really important because it's government, private sector, and then these critical organizations like the Chamber and like the Business Roundtable that came together. And as Brad said, this is really a new way of working, but it's bringing the insights, the access, the scale, and the speed that's so different as we move forward. And in a world where we've been incredibly disrupted by the pandemic, it's great to see something so positive coming from it. And as you think about our people on the ground, we as companies start always with our people, right? That is our responsibility as employers. And it is absolutely heartbreaking. All of us have colleagues who've been affected. We've lost colleagues. We know their colleagues, our colleagues who've lost family members, and we have many colleagues in the outside of India who are watching really feeling helpless. And it's really important that we recognize that the collective action here has been about also how we can help each other. And so as Arvind talked about, and you did, we have literally over 200 CHROs who are on calls every single week, sharing the best practices. Things like how if you put together a home health kit, it allows telehealth to make sure that employees don't go to the hospital when they don't really need to go to the hospital and take up beds that are needed for others because they've got the right monitoring and the right supplies. And then getting those supplies, took our partners around the world, as well as the logistic partners, to actually, as they ran out in India, to get them. And all of that in helping our employees is also helping the communities by preventing some group of people from having to use healthcare capacity that is overrun. And so when you go back to the connection, commitment, and collective action, all of this is intertwined, right? In terms of what we can do for our employees and for the communities. And there's been so much innovation. We provided for the first time ever telehealth capacity outside of India into India to help alleviate. And now that was with our partner, United Health Group, and other partners around the world are doing the same for other companies that, again, came out of the collective sharing of what the art of the possible was, and then that industry coming together to share how to do that. So it really is a lesson, and you go back to the build back better, as Andy was talking about, and the public-private, and including the not-for-profits and the trade associations has been really critical.
Thank you, Julie. I want to ask all three of you the same question in a little bit of a lightning round here. And Arvind, I'm going to start with you. So we're talking today to thousands of people in more than 140 countries on 6 continents. And I imagine they would all look up to the three of you and say, okay, you're global leaders. This has been a really difficult time. This has been an unbelievable disruption, almost beyond our ability to perceive it in the moment. Why should we be optimistic that we can get back to health, that we can get back to economic health? And so Arvind, starting with you, what makes you optimistic right now?
Oh, it's very simple. 3 reasons. One is actually where you started, Suzanne. Science. We have the science that will let us get through the pandemic quickly. What the various pharmaceutical companies, vaccine makers, but more than that, all the epidemiologists, all of the scientists have done is remarkable. Standing on a firm footing of science always gives me a lot more optimism than just anecdotal ad hoc reactions. Second, the private public. I'm putting it in that order because the private in this instance reacted a lot faster. Public came along. Hopefully public will get bigger faster, but that's the second reason. And the third is the eternal optimism of our people. Julie mentioned some of the people's reactions, but we have employees in India, 100 of them get together and supply oxygen to each other because one of them figures out where to get it from. Somebody else figures out how to get a hospital bed. Somebody else figures out how to get a therapeutic. That human spirit, it is our role as leaders and CEOs to keep it going, to sort of nurture it, not to let it get out. Those are my 3 reasons for optimism on the economic recovery, not just the health recovery.
I'm going to have those Science Will Win t-shirts, and you're getting the first one. Julie, I'm going to ask you the same question. What makes you optimistic right now?
It's when you think back to the pandemic and the first time we've all faced what has been a very leveling experience, right? It's actually been the power of bringing the best of our global experiences. Let us not forget that at the beginning of the pandemic, India helped many countries around the world, including the US. And today, over 90 countries are dependent on India for their vaccines. And you can go around country by country and see the incredible contributions. And so what we have experienced together has also highlighted the power of working together. And I believe that we will take these insights And we will work together differently, not just within companies. We talk about that all the time, digital transformation, new ways of working, but that what you're seeing is really the next level, which is new ways of working globally for the benefit of all. And I think that's tremendously exciting as we move forward. And we have a commitment. I mean, we have an obligation to make sure it continues to happen. But I think there's a great power in unlocking all of our country's great resources, innovation, and talent.
And Brad, lastly, over to you. What makes you optimistic?
Well, I think both Arvind and Julie have captured so much, but I would say when people look back at this historically, I think one of the things that clearly will stand out is this extraordinary scientific accomplishment at a global level in developing a vaccine so quickly. And then, of course, we have to continue to ensure the vaccines are manufactured and distributed as quickly as possible. One of the government officials that all of us met with a couple of weeks ago, I thought put it very well. Success will be if this pandemic ends around the world in 2022. Failure will be if it takes to 2024. So I think we can focus on that test of success with the work to come. And if we achieve that, it will show that, frankly, humanity's come a long way. And, I would just add to that, look, this is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. It's been a test for every one of us. It's been a challenge for every one of us, and we've lost loved ones and colleagues along the way. But we will come out of this stronger, and we just have to then come out with the resolve to put that strength to work and not let it dissipate.
I think that's right. And I'll take the moderator's prerogative and answer my own question, which is what makes me optimistic is working with leaders like you, the other members of the task force, our sponsors today, because it really shows the role that business can play as problem solver, as innovator, and that when businesses do well, they can really do good. So it's been a privilege learning from all of you and being able to do this work together. And we'll let you get back to your day jobs and this important work of the task force. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you.
Okay, good morning to all. I have the privilege of moderating a panel on inclusive growth strategies in emerging markets. And we have two very distinguished executives who have a unique window into emerging markets, into inclusive growth, into really what's happening. With us this morning is Carol Tomé, CEO of UPS. Pleasure to have you, Carol. Nice to see you again.
Good to see
and
you.
Blanca Treviño, CEO of SoftTech, who joins us from Mexico, Coahuila.
Yes. Thank you so much.
UPS, and when I saw these numbers, I was just, I was marveled. 2% of global GDP. You actually move around the world. 2% of global GDP, 6% of US GDP. moves through your global network. That is incredibly impressive. And then on SoftTech, Blanca, not only are you a global company, you're founded in 1982, but the largest provider of IT services from Latin America. So you also have this unique view of what's happening in these important emerging markets. I can't think of two better guests to discuss inclusive growth, the focus on emerging markets, than Carol and Blanca. Thank you again for being here. I'm going to kick it off. Carol, if I may, I'll go to you. And the pandemic impact on global trade, it seems like trade is bouncing back. There's a sense of optimism, a sense that things are returning somewhat to some normality. What are you seeing? Are global supply chains responding? Is there still a void? What's out there?
Well, I'm delighted to be here today, and thank you so much, Carlos, for your question, and hello, everyone. We are at UPS are at the intersection of global trade and the digital economy. And to your point, business has bounced back and bounced back in a big way, in large part driven by the pandemic, because there's been a step change in e-commerce sales around the globe. As people were sheltering in place, they were buying things online, and we certainly saw that come into our network. That trend continues into 2021, and I can make that real for you by just looking at our performance in the first quarter. If I look at our business outside the United States, it was very growthy. In fact, all of our export lanes reported double-digit positive growth. Our commercial business outside of the United States grew by 10% in the first quarter, and our small and medium-sized businesses also grew about 23% outside of the United States. There is a demand-supply imbalance, which is causing opportunities for pricing to be firm, and for businesses like UPS to really perform. Now, there are some supply chain challenges, as we are well aware of. These would be raw material challenges. These would be parts of the worldwide supply chain that's gotten gummed up, be it the Suez Canal or here in the United States on the West Coast. But other than those challenges, the business climate is very robust.
Supply-demand imbalance, that really sums it up. Thank you, Carol. Blanca, services trade up 60% faster than goods, and obviously driven a lot by digital tech. So you're in the right place at the right time. How is that translating to growth in emerging markets? And do you see any patterns there?
Yeah, let me start by thanking you again for inviting me to this and sharing the panel with both of you. And yes, when you think about it, we are in the right time and the right place. That's what you said, and I completely agree with you. And yes, despite the fact that some emerging markets, particularly Latin America, may lag in terms of digitization of services compared to advanced economies, it is irrefutable that more and more services are being delivered in a digital fashion and are becoming borderless. And as you rightly point out, our industry is perhaps at the forefront of this digitization and elimination of borders. And we have been delivering services to the US and Europe from Mexico from over 2 decades now. So using digital technologies and the legal framework provided by international treaties like NAFTA or USMCA like today, right? But now we're seeing this evolving into more services. Financial services industry is being digitized rapidly. The fastest growing financial services firm in Latin America is Nubank, which was recently valued at $25 billion, and it is the latest round. So a bank in Latin America that has no branches and is growing despite the regulation that exists in Brazil, and no one can argue that they are growing because of the heavy regulatory environment. But they have focused on designing banking experiences that isolate their customer from those regulatory burdens and provide a refreshing approach focused on the client. The pandemic just came to reinforce, and Carol mentioned this, how relevant a digital pure play can be in customer financials. So you can see this trend also in many spaces, from entertainment, like with Netflix, Disney Plus, HBO Max, or music streaming like Spotify or Apple Music. These are services that kept growing despite the pandemic, and we can argue that they grew even further because of the pandemic. But as vaccines roll out, we will see more of the services sector growing. But a big engine for growth of this segment has been the rise of digital. Perhaps the most representative sector for this is the restaurant industry. Services like Group Hub, Uber Eats, as our Latin American Rappi, played an enormous role in keeping the restaurant industry afloat. Try to imagine what would have happened without Uber Eats to all those restaurants that kept running because of that. One of our customers, a big fast food restaurant chain, saw themselves through digital aggregation like Uber Eats, like I just mentioned, or Postmates, grow from less than 10% to over 60. And I think you mentioned some of this. So this changes in how consumers interact and consume services using digital tools will never go back to pre-pandemic levels. We truly believe that. So the change is permanent. Perhaps it will subsidize a little, but it will never go back as it was in 2019. So it is changing. It is changing even in emerging markets, like you mentioned.
That's great. We will never go back. And if you're doing well now, I can just imagine once the vaccine has been rolled out. Carol, I failed to congratulate you on your incredible results. We talk about inclusive growth. There are customers of all sizes. And in order for it to be truly inclusive, we have to think about medium, small, and even micro firms. What are you seeing there, and what can be done to include them in this return to prosperity?
Well, we have a laser focus on growing small and medium-sized businesses around the globe. And I couldn't agree more with what Blanca just said. It's all about a digital experience. It's what they need to have digital fluency and digital capabilities to conduct commerce wherever they are and whatever geographies they want to play. And we're leaning into that in a big way. We have 16 customer journeys that we've identified to simplify the experience for this customer, making it easier for them to have commerce with UPS and ship their packages through us. We weren't built for that, but we're simplifying it and really thinking about the experience from end to end, from the shipper to the recipient. And we're seeing that focus on the experience really starting to take hold. We grew our small and medium-sized businesses globally faster than any other customer segment in the first quarter alone. And one thing we've invested in is a platform we call our digital access platform. And this is where we are partnering with companies like Shopify and Stops.com and eBay and Facebook and many, many others who have stood up platforms for these small and medium-sized businesses, including micro businesses, to sell through their platform to their end customer. And we're delivering the packages on the other side of that transaction. This was a concept, a thought back in the second quarter of 2019. Our DAP business, or our digital access program, will be a $1 billion business this year, and we're taking it globally. And we see demand for this in every market in which we operate. So we're very excited about what it means to support this customer segment, because it's an important segment to serve.
Those are amazing numbers, truly amazing numbers. And the speed with which you've reached those numbers is incredible. Blanca, your thoughts on how the digital revolution is helping these small and medium-sized companies throughout the region, throughout the world?
Right. Well, Carol already mentioned something that it's impressive, and how they have been able to support that growth, and how they have been able to play in this. I cannot imagine how they will be able to do it without UPS. It is incredible what they're doing. Otherwise, it will be very difficult. But there has never been a better time for small businesses. I truly believe that. And like we have been saying, it's leveraging that technology, and the amount of technology at their disposal will have been unimaginable just 10 or 15 years ago. Try to imagine that. And to achieve what a small business can do today, a company in the 90s, remember that, probably we've been there, we have had to invest millions of dollars. E-commerce capabilities, for instance, you can create a storefront in Amazon or Mercado Libre in the case of Latin America in a matter of minutes. And that can open you up for a market as big as you want. You have access to a global market. It can be regional, national, or global. It's up to that small business, but they do have that access. And by the way, Mercado Libre, it's the most valuable company in Latin America. And it is for a reason. It has the highest market cap that any other, that American Mobile, FEMSA, or Petrobras, that are also incredible. But just look at Mercado Libre, and again, it is for a reason. A small business can leverage that platform, and Carol just gave us some examples of those platforms. But again, they can leverage that in a matter of hours. So let's go back to supply chain, global supply chain. You can really have UPS, and you can source your supplies or distribute your products on the click of a button. Advertising, you can leverage Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, even TikTok, to promote your products in a highly effective fashion. So again, imagine that 10, 15 years ago, impossible. Now it is at a reach of every business, regardless of its size. So to better answer the question, what is holding them back? Maybe it's the better digital awareness. I would say that, and we have to invest in that. But I truly believe that there has never been a better time for small businesses.
And Blanca, you're seeing not only consumers adapt to the new digital economy, but small businesses as well.
Absolutely. Yeah. So go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, please go ahead. Go ahead.
No. Go ahead. Finish the question. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, just wondering if small businesses are keeping up with the digital transformation. We know consumers are small businesses as well keeping up with that?
And I think you have both, right? Those that understood how important and how they could be able to do what I just described. And obviously those that were not able to move towards that or didn't have that kind of awareness or understanding, or even a small investment that it's needed, because again, I would emphasize that it's a small, take a look at what Carol just mentioned, or the way that advertising is today. So small businesses have this chance that they didn't have before. Try to imagine, if you asked me this 10 years ago, I would say there was no way for them to face what we had. But today with digital technologies, I wouldn't say it's easy, but it is possible. Absolutely much possible than it was 10 years ago. So I think, Carlos, that you see both different kind of companies, those that really understood that probably are new companies. I think they were they did have that digital awareness. And you have all, I would say not all, but companies that have been there for some time, still small, and they just couldn't understand how they could leverage this. So I think we see both, Carlos, from my perspective, some that were able to take advantage of this, and some others that probably they have not been able to really understand the potential, and they are sometimes concerned and they don't understand the implications, but also the opportunities. I'll say that.
Yeah, all of a sudden, small businesses can access the world. They can become exporters. It's amazing. Right. Carol, UPS deserves a lot of credit for vaccine distribution. And sometimes we don't realize that the vaccines have to get places, and we don't even stop and think, how is it that they're getting there so quickly and so efficiently? And it's thanks to companies like UPS. Can you talk a little bit about the linkage between vaccine distribution and recovery? There must be a direct link, as we're seeing here in the US in emerging markets.
Well, we are so proud and privileged to be part of this moment, to be delivering vaccines. Today, we have delivered 250 million vaccines to over 92 countries. And by the end of the year, we estimate we will have delivered 1 billion vaccines. Wow. And it's a complicated supply chain, as you can appreciate. We basically run a network within a network. We have special labeling that goes on the packages that carry the vaccines. We've stood up control towers to watch those packages as they travel across the network. We manufacture dry ice that accompanies the vaccines for certain of those vaccines that need to be chilled. We have freezer farms in 3 parts of the world. So it's super complicated, but we're really, really proud to be part of it. And we're delivering at 99.9% delivery efficiency. So we're not missing a deadline, which is important too, because these are time sensitive biologics. And we've been in this industry for a while, and what we believe that you can't have sustainable economic recovery until we've got everyone safe. And the only way you get everyone safe is you have to have an equitable distribution of the vaccine. I'm a capitalist, I'm a businesswoman, and I'm making money on these vaccines that we're delivering. But we also know there are parts of the world where we need to get vaccines distributed in a different way. So we are supporting COVAX and NGOs and other organizations to get vaccines into those parts of the world where the commercial relationship isn't going to be the same. And in fact, we're committing some of our humanitarian dollars in this regard. We all are watching what's happening in India. It's tragic there. Last week, we announced a $1 million contribution to help in that regard. We're real focused on making sure that we can help the parts of the world that need help, because without it, if we don't have equitable vaccines, we just don't think the recovery is sustainable. So we've got to get it done. One cool story is we are partnering with, we were the first company that was authorized by the FAA to have a drone airline. So we do have a drone airline called UPS Flight Forward. We partnered with another drone company to actually deliver vaccines in Rwanda using drones. How cool is that, right? So there's a lot of cool technology that's coming into the vaccine distribution as we go about this journey.
That's great. That's one of the stories that I think needs to be told more and more, is the role of the private sector.
Yeah.
And UPS is probably the best example I can think of the private sector really stepping up and making things happen. So thank you and congratulations.
Thank you.
Blanca, you have a unique view of financial services. We've been talking for quite a while about the unbanked and how we can include more companies, more businesses in the mainstream banking system. What are you seeing there? Is the digital revolution also helping small and medium-sized businesses be included and be part of the banking and the financial system?
Yeah, let me start by taking the opportunity to tell Carol how proud they should be of the role they are playing, and how we all should be very grateful, because you have been key, not just during the pandemic and helping all the things that you described, but being part of this vaccination, and the numbers are impressive. When you think about, you mentioned that you're going to be able to deliver probably 1 billion vaccines. It is incredible. I know, and I agree, it should be very complicated, but I'm absolutely sure that we are all amazed by the numbers and all grateful for the work that you're doing. So I wanted to take that opportunity. Thank you so much. But going to your question, Carlos, I think no one can argue the role of digital technologies in this financial inclusion. Without that technology, I truly believe it will be very, very difficult. And let's think about, again, it will be impossible without digitization or access to mobile devices. Think about India. It's a very good example in a different perspective, or how they have been able to really leverage that technology and giving that access to every small community. But mobile devices change completely in obviously the financial institutions, no matter what kind of player you are, allowed to happen. You can be in every community without having any kind of branch. And probably the reason for that is that you have new digital players and different kind of players. You can think of the big techs or the fintechs, absolutely important, the fintechs, or neobanks, telcos, even telcos. And probably if we start by those small or new players, they have focused really on a very specific process or whatever issue they might have, and that will give them and probably access to credits. Some others are more that for payment methods or even investors. But probably the huge difference that they started 100% digital. Those kind of players, and most of them they don't have any kind of assets, and but they focus on those very probably spaces where traditional banks they see that it's difficult. Again, when you think about big techs or fintechs, and probably when you think about big techs, look at Google, Apple, Facebook, even Amazon. They are moving into this space. They are offering those kind of services because they have access to a very large customer base. But I mentioned before Nubank, for neobanks, if you want to call it that way, it's they emerged that way. They emerged as a digital bank, and again competing with the huge traditional banks because they are very focused. They leverage technology. They understand that they don't have those big assets on their back. So they are more flexible. They are more, they can have that access without having that. But something that is important, Carlos, it's regulation. I think that if one thing, it's probably speeding or stopping, you can see it either way, is regulation. And again, different governments are doing this in a different way. And that will either, again, like I said, speed up or stop this financial institution. It is key. Again, when you look at India, it's incredible. When you look at other, probably even Latin American companies, when you don't have access to internet in those very far away communities, it will be difficult because even though you might have digital technologies, if you don't have access to internet, it's gonna be difficult. So it is all dependable on that and that public policies that will allow them to have that. But again, leveraging technology and having all those different players, giving those different alternatives to every community, to everyone. What you can do with your mobile device is incredible. When I started my career, and remember those huge computers, huge. They would take a room, more than a room. But with your mobile device, it's not just that you can buy something from Amazon. It's not that you can order something or schedule something for UPS. It's everything that you can do related to financial services, no matter where you are, no matter if there's a bank branch there. It is incredible. And again, I think the challenge is for governments to really make sure that the policies are there, that they do have access to that internet. And from my perspective, that is the challenge. You do have the players, you do have the mobile devices. Probably you have to, education will be key for them. Those, again, far away communities, you have to probably help them to understand how can they leverage this. But it's incredible, Carlos, from my perspective. The tools are there, the trends are there. So it's up to the governments to again, close this gap and give them that access. Africa, India, it's incredible that are doing this. Sometimes much better than countries that you might think that they will do it very easily. Probably because they need it. Probably that was the only way. And those players that we mentioned, they understood the opportunity and they put everything on the table in order to make this happen.
Thank you. You know, one of the things that makes your achievements, UPS, Softtek, other companies, is that before COVID, trade was undergoing a lot of disruption. So it's not like you know, you've been able to do this in a very smooth operating trade environment. We've had all the trade disruptions that we all know well, and then on top of that, here comes COVID. So the Biden administration, and I want to read these points here. They've talked about that they want trade that is worker centered. focused on the middle class or benefiting the middle class and benefiting communities and people of color and women. So those are the things that they would like their policy to benefit those people, those communities. I have two questions for each of you. One is, how are you dealing with those disruptions that are probably still out there? I mean, you mentioned 99.9% accuracy in delivery. That's amazing considering the disruptions that were out there. How are you dealing with that? And do you have one or two recommendations on trade policy that can help inclusive growth in emerging markets? Would you like to start, Carol?
Happy to. So we're focusing on the wildly important. You know, there are a lot of things that are happening in the world, but by focusing on the wildly important, we're not letting the distractions get in the way of doing what we must do. Clearly delivering vaccines on time, wildly important. So it's about resource allocation, where we put our head content, where we put our dollars on those things that really matter, and taking some things off the table that just don't matter anymore. And we are constantly revisiting the wildly important list because the world around us is changing so quickly. But that has certainly helped us stay laser focused on what we have to do. And as I think about, okay, what's next? When we think about the impact of the pandemic, we know that women were impacted more than any other group. And even before the pandemic, women had barriers for global trade. Some of those were real barriers, regulatory barriers, and some of those were more of biases, like pink tariffs. But we've really got to think about how we can leverage into women and helping them grow global trade. There was great research done by McKinsey that said that if men and women were to trade equally, it would add something like $20+ trillion to the global economy. So the business case is solid. Now we just got to move. We got to move. We've got to get some changes to regulations. These could be empowered by the G7 and supported by the WTO. We've got to get rid of the biases that are out there. And companies like UPS, well, we can make a difference too. We've just stood up a women's exporter program, enabling women entrepreneurs to export into 4 Latin American countries. We're very excited about that. We're supporting 3 million women in she trades. So we're putting our money, our actions behind this because we think that we can help change the narrative when it comes to women and global trade.
It's interesting that you're talking, COVID has been devastating for so many countries, people. But as you look to the future, there's some good things that are going to happen, such as the inclusion of women in trade. And that's very insightful, very insightful. Blanca, what do you think of the trading environment, and what are the one or two things that you'd like to see?
Well, the first thing that I was really energized to hear was that the Biden administration understood that policies were needed. When you do understand that and you start making things, that's the best sign that you can have. If you don't take a look at that is a problem, that is something that you have to take care. It will take so much time. So first of all, I have to say that I really look at this as something that it's very, very important when you see an administration understanding that it is needed. Carol shares some examples that are absolutely true. And again, when you see a government or administration that understands this and will put in place policies, is very encouraging from my perspective. But also when you think about, and it is true, COVID was devastating, and probably it was very clear and very transparent, or some inequalities, if you want to call it that way. They put it in the clear. It was very obvious. But I believe that disruptions also and situations like COVID, as devastating as they were, also again make us to think what is the best way to contribute into this. And women absolutely is one of the things that we need, how we support them. But also, and you made this question about small businesses, disruption, again, when you think about all of this, disruptions give you also opportunities. And it's up to you, either if you're a woman, if you're a company, if you're a small business, to really understand this. We have to say that at least the US government really understand this, and they are putting their eyes there and everything that is needed, the policies. It was, I'm sure you're familiar with the USMCA, that's this treaty between Canada, the US, and Mexico. And it's interesting the way that probably the first thing that will not agree or that we will question each other, and there was the first meeting yesterday between the Minister of Economy, and it is related to those kind of things, how the three countries are aligned in giving this kind of things. I mean, allowing them to making this happen, which is also encouraging. But we have to look at disruption as an opportunity, and as an opportunity when you understand all the different things that are needed. And I completely agree with Carl and the role that we have to play in order to support the different things that we're seeing, Carlos.
Thank you. Thank you. We've had the privilege of listening to two of the great business leaders who are making things happen, who are solving problems. As we think about the world is getting better, we often forget about who's making it happen. And business leaders such as Carol Tomé, CEO of UPS, Blanca Treviño, CEO of Softec. Congratulations. And on behalf of so many people around the world, thank you for everything you're doing. And thank you for being here.
Thanks
Thank you.
again for the invitation. Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Thank you, Carlos, for a stimulating panel, my good friend. I'm Myron Brilliant. I'm the Executive Vice President of the U.S. Chamber in charge of international affairs. And as Suzanne Clark said at the outset, we pulled this global forum together to really not only talk about America's leadership around the pandemic, around climate change, around trade, around digitalization of our economy, but the need to work as a global community. And today, I begin one of three discussions with a world leader to really emphasize that point, that this is a need and a time for concerted collective action, as Julie Sweet of Accenture said in a previous panel. We need to work together, the private sector and the public sector, and of course, governments working together hand in hand to combat the challenges we face as a global community. I'm really delighted to be sitting down with an interview with the President of Kenya, my good friend, President Kenyatta. It's always a pleasure to welcome President Kenyatta. Mr. President, I wish we were in person, but we'll have to deal with this virtual platform. I just want to say at the outset to our global audience that President Kenyatta is someone that will not only share his insights about what's going on in Kenya with respect to the pandemic and other issues that we'll talk about, but also in his role as a leader on the continent, and talk about how important it is to advance Africa's regional economic and political integration, and how we work together to address global challenges. During his time in office, President Kenyatta has really been at the forefront of change in the continent, leading his country's adoption of technology advancements, embracing new ways to promote sustainability while expanding growth, and championing new trade opportunities across the continent and with the United States, as you will hear, and with other partners around the world. It's really no wonder that Kenya has been one of the most important economies on the continent, one of the fastest growing ones, and frankly, one of the United States' largest trading partners as well on the continent. President Kenyatta has really embraced the need for greater economic and frankly political integration, as you said, across the continent. And we'll talk about that in the conversation today. But I have to begin with what's on everyone's mind, how we deal with COVID-19. And Mr. President, I have to say at the outset that Kenya and the continent has done pretty well. Of course, we've seen some challenges in South Africa, but largely we've seen you weather the global pandemic better than most regions of the world. That said, the vaccination rates are very low in Africa and in your country. We are also obviously very worried about hotspots. We talked a lot about India in an earlier panel this morning. And I know that you're concerned about how we deal with these hotspots and the impact on the continent. So I want to ask you first to tell us why Africa has done better than many regions of the world, but what you're concerned about in terms of next steps, avoiding a second wave or a third wave of this crisis. Mr. President, thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Myron, and really pleasure to be with you again. And let me say good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all who are participating across the globe. And to thank you and to thank the Chamber, the American Chamber of Commerce, for putting this session together and giving us an ability to share experiences and to talk to each other and see how in this global community we can deal with the current crisis and all of us move out of it. You've asked the question as to how did Kenya, how did Africa manage to do that much better? I'll be very frank with you and say that I can't 100% put a nail to it and say that this is what we did. Neither can I say hand to heart that we are out of this crisis and what we're seeing happening in other places will not happen on our continent. But what I can say is that at least here in Kenya, from the very onset of the pandemic and when we realized that this was a global threat, we took immediate steps in terms of lockdown way back there, early March 2020. And what we did is we said that we just have to contain this. We don't understand it. We don't know what it is. And we proceeded to close our borders, to close our schools, to close our places of worship. We closed our airspace. We limited even movement within the country from one region or one part of the country to another. And we also, at the same time, leveraged on a lot of the infrastructure that we already had in terms of closed schools, a return to isolation centers, etc. And all of this was, it greatly helped because it enabled us to step up on our surveillance. It enabled us to also ensure that we were catching the early victims of COVID much earlier than most actually were able to do. I must also be honest and say that the measures that we took very early came at a huge and tremendous cost to our economy. All our businesses, big and small, were really heavily affected during that time. And across the world, we've seen it. Job losses, business losses, livelihoods. But at the end of the day, what we decided in Kenya was that lives mattered over economy. We can always rebuild an economy, but we can never bring back a life. And we decided that we were going to focus ourselves on life. And really what I attribute our success to is the fact that we also adopted a whole government approach. We didn't just say that this was a public health pandemic. We brought all government agencies on board, worked together, developed a plan together. We realized that a good number of our people live day to day. So we realized an economic stimulus package was essential and a safety net was essential for those people who work day on day or lived on a daily wage. And we moved in there, tried to provide those safety nets in order to encourage them to be able to stay at home and others to be able to engage in activities that were developmental but didn't require too much mingling or integrating with people. And I believe that really helped in terms of softening and cushioning those who were hardest hit, especially in the service sectors and other such sectors. We developed an emergency COVID response center that brought on board all the different agencies of government. This again was critical in helping us identify, isolate, and like I said, leveraging on some of our previous infrastructure, using them, schools and other such facilities as isolation centers in order to be able to contain the spread of the disease. We also actively engaged our manufacturing sector, because if you recall, way there in early March, we had the virus, but things like PPEs, masks were difficult to come by. So we engaged the private sector directly and frontally, and many of them began to change their production line, producing PPEs, producing masks, and other health-related items such as that, moving from their traditional manufacturing lines. This indeed proved to be so successful that we were not only able to supply our own needs in terms of protective equipment and masks and so forth, but we were also able to start exporting to the region who weren't as equally prepared. And these are some of the things that we did, using and leveraging also on technology to allow people to contact trace, and issues, surrounding tracing of possible victims, and again, stopping the spread. So let me say that it's been a combined effort, a whole government approach, and really, I think the biggest partners have been the Kenyan people themselves, who really, from the very beginning, understood that this was a danger to them, and they became active partners. So we were regularly informing, and the public was willingly responding. And I think all of us working together, this is what has created this success so far. But I must, at the very conclusion, say that going forward, it's going to be vaccine and the availability of vaccine that will ensure that we put an end to this pandemic. And herein lies the biggest crisis that Africa has: access to vaccines. And as you said earlier, I was in an earlier meeting with fellow leaders hosted by Emmanuel Macron in Paris. And the key issue that we're trying to put forward is that nobody's going to be safe until everybody is safe. The world economy isn't going to come back until everybody is safe. So we need to be able to focus on ensuring that Africa, the developed world, gets access to vaccines, because it is only when we properly and vaccinate all our people that we can begin to get back to as near normal as possible. So I will conclude by saying that vaccine availability is going to be the key to getting the world economy back on its feet.
Well, President Kenyatta, we agree with you. We have set up a global task force on the pandemic response with other organizations like the Business Roundtable, with leading American executives. And we're very committed to working not only on the hotspots of the day like India, but also thinking through how we can be helpful to your country and others around the world as we work with our government to find those solutions to make sure we have vaccines distributed around the world, that we have the supply chains that are operating right, and the manufacturing. In the interest of time, let me move to climate change, which is another pressing challenge that we face as a global community. And I know that Kenya has been using technology to address climate change, and particularly around agriculture, which is such a dominant sector, not only for your country, but for the continent. Can you tell us a little bit about how you're using technology to combat climate change and to bring in innovation to make sure that as we affect change in the climate, that we're thinking about the market solutions, market innovation? Tell us what your approach has been and what we should learn from your approach.
What we have been focusing ourselves on, especially when it relates to agriculture, technology, and how the two come together to help us also combat the issue of climate change, is first and foremost by using technology, using especially mobile technology, to basically inform farmers on better farming practices, better soil managing practices, better ways to conserve and utilize water, using technology, for example, to set up small-scale irrigation plants that are started and stopped even if you're away from the farm through the use of your mobile phone. Using energy-saving instruments, solar panels to power irrigation systems. These are some of the things that we are doing to help not only improve farming techniques, but to make them more climate friendly, so to say, while at the same time increasing yields and reducing costs to farmers. But where we've really made major strides is in the energy sector, where we have really focused on the use of green energy to power not only agriculture, but most of our industries. Kenya, for example, is ranked in the top 10 of the world because we now have almost 90% of our power coming from green sources, be it geothermal, wind, or solar, as well as hydro, which has been traditional in Kenya for a very long time. And these are part of the elements that we are also trying to push and advocate. But we're also saying that we can also do it the natural way. We're also encouraging, for example, tree planting, boosting our forest cover by encouraging farmers to move into a tree production and the production of, for example, bamboo, and using that as the byproducts of bamboo, you know, for different making of furniture, making of houses, making of electricity poles, which we're also doing, and so many other aspects, while at the same time conserving our environment, but making use of the environment to provide an income for our farmers. So in a nutshell, those are just some of the things that we are trying to work on in Kenya to be able to sustain growth, keep growth going, create jobs, while at the same time ensuring that we are looking after our environment as well.
Well, I think there's plenty of opportunities for the private sector to make a contribution from the United States and elsewhere, and I know you welcome that. But in the interest, go ahead.
We welcome that tremendously, because we've got a lot of people now looking at the different uses, for example, of geothermal for the production, for example, of hydrogen and other such issues like that. So I do believe that through green practices, they're also creating new opportunities for employment, new opportunities for investment. And these are some of the areas that we are telling our international partners, we are committed to this. Let's look at recycling. Let's look at better utilization of our oceans, of which Kenya has, and we are part of this whole global ocean management group, where we're saying that we can sustainably utilize our oceans, earn from them, while at the same time sustaining them for future generations, while creating opportunities both for investment but also for employment.
I think critically important, and we welcome that contribution that we can make. I want to talk about trade and inclusive growth. It was the subject of a previous panel, but I think it's important in the context of our relationship with Kenya and the U.S. relationship with the continent from a larger standpoint. A little over a year ago, the two of us sat down at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and talked about the importance of the U.S.-Kenya Free Trade Agreement. And I want you to reflect on why that's important, first and foremost, what it means for Kenya and the United States, but also for America's role in Africa. But as importantly, talk to me about what Kenya is doing to ensure inclusive growth, that growth isn't just for one segment of your society that's inclusive, and what you see, what signals you see that the rest of Africa is also taking steps to advance inclusive growth in a way that will promote more trade, more investment across the continent, but encourage the U.S. private sector to participate.
I think first I must begin by talking about the Africa Free Trade area. And with the coming into force now of the Africa Free Trade area, we are saying that here we are on the African continent for the very first time in history, where we are talking to the world with a market of 1 billion people who require everything from a toothbrush to a bicycle to high technology. And this now is a market that is accessible to the globe as a result of this particular arrangement. And that is why I personally am very keen on seeing the arrangement between Kenya and the United States under the free trade arrangement coming into force as two countries who understand each other, who understand and have similar and shared values, who understand that private sector is really the driver of growth and job creation, to be at the very vanguard and the entry point for US businesses onto the continent. You're talking about inclusive growth. One of the things that we have seen in Kenya is that we have this huge informal sector which people have always ignored, but has been the backbone actually of sustaining Kenya's economy. These are the small, medium enterprises that are really the backbone of Kenya's economy. I know that America is really not built on the back of the giants. The giants came as a result of amalgamation. America was built on the backs of small businesses across the United States. They were the backbone of creating the economy that we know the United States to be today. They are the ones who I am very keen, through partnership with the Chamber, through the negotiations that we're doing, linking those small businesses with their counterparts here in Kenya. This is where the real opportunity lies. That is not to say that we're telling the big boys, no, don't come in. They are already here. They are already working here. The IBMs are here. The big corporations are all here already. But they don't have the same capacity to propel inclusive growth as do your small and medium businesses that have a much greater capacity of affecting the lives and changing livelihoods at the very grassroots level. And that is why I believe this partnership between us and the Chamber, between the two of us, working to further enable our small and medium enterprises to come together. They are the ones who are most adverse to risk in areas where they are not familiar. And I believe through our channels, we can make them less risk averse and be able to take advantage of the opportunities that are there.
Mr. President, we're going to run out of time, but I want to ask you one last question. Tell me, in your sense, what do you need from America today? What does Africa need in terms of leadership and support? What are the critical things? We didn't get to talk about the digital economy. We didn't get to talk about a number of issues, but what do you think is most important to take away from this conversation for our global audience?
Kenya, and I believe the same will apply to Africa, needs American investment. It needs American technology. It needs American markets. But what can Kenya offer, or Africa for that matter, in return? We can offer equally markets for your products. As I'm talking about 1 billion people, we can also offer experienced, educated now, young labor that is more than willing to work. We can offer innovation, and has been proved, and if we had a chance to talk about the digital side of things, we'll get another chance to talk about that some other time, as I would be able to explain. So I believe that this is a mutually beneficial relationship that offers investment opportunity with great returns for American companies, while at the same time offering job opportunities, products, and technology. And through working together, we are able then to first and foremost deal with the fears, intellectual property and all of these other fears that people have, resolving those and be able to create a conducive environment where our businesses, our people can interact healthily and can interact in a mutually beneficial relationship, both from an investment and from a market point of view?
Mr. President, we're going to have to leave it there. Stay healthy, stay safe, stay engaged with us in the United States. Know that the U.S. Chamber and our members support the U.S.-Kenya Free Trade Agreement, and we support efforts to deal with the pandemic and work with you on climate change and, of course, enhance trade and commercial opportunities. Thank you very much for being with us today, my good friend. We'll see you soon, hopefully either in Nairobi or in Washington. Thank you for joining us.
Myron, it's always a pleasure, and thanks for having me, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you soon. No more on screen, but face to face. Many things to share.
Thank you. Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Take care now.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. I'm Shivani Joshi. Over the next 30 minutes, we're digging into digital transformation across the globe, from communication to financial transactions to tracking important global trends. Technology touches everything we do. Digital transformation holds the potential to shape the future in endless ways and requires global cooperation so we can build that future together. Joining me now to discuss it all is Kent Walker. He's the Senior Vice President of Global Affairs at Google, and Ambassador Michael Froman, Vice Chairman and President of Strategic Growth at MasterCard. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's start with the here and now. The pandemic has ushered in a robust amount of digital adoption, but I know that both of you independently believe we haven't even scratched the surface of the potential to be unleashed. So let's talk about that as we kick things off. Mike, imagine the future a bit. What are the biggest opportunities, and what role do you think companies like MasterCard should play in the post-pandemic world to harness the potential of digital and at the same time support economic growth?
Well, thanks very much for having me. And as you said, the pandemic really underscored and perhaps accelerated trends that have been underway for some time, but it's also opened up all sorts of new opportunities. For us, it really underscored just how important it was, as a company that's been focused on financial inclusion over the years, to be connected to the digital economy. Whether you're an individual getting support payments from your government, pension payments from your government, et cetera, or you're a small business needing to go from being a brick and mortar shop to an online e-commerce player, connecting with your customers, connecting with your suppliers, staying relevant and surviving and hopefully thriving in the digital economy. And I think that's really underscored just how important it is that we create tools for people to join the digital economy, that we find ways of ensuring that coming out of this pandemic, that we're building back better, stronger, more inclusively, more sustainably. And I think there's some tremendous business opportunities that come with that. For us, as an example, we're working with about 100 governments around the world right now to help them do their disbursements to people more efficiently, more effectively, with less fraud, ensuring that resources get in the hands of individuals who need them, who perhaps previously had to go to a post office to pick up their pension check. As an example, can't do that in the age of COVID. This is a new opportunity. And for small businesses, helping them get online, get digital, get paid securely, get access to capital, all because they're part of the digital economy. That opens up all sorts of new opportunities.
New opportunities and new challenges at the same time. Kent, over to you now. Similar question. What does Google believe is possible, and how are you preparing for it as a company?
Sure. As Mike said, we're not out of the woods yet. We're still seeing this terrible human cost around the world, countries like India and Brazil that are facing huge challenges. But as hard as that last year has been, it's also shown the value and the potential of technology. We've got millions of people and small businesses coming online for the first time, using digital tools to connect. 1/3 of businesses are saying that they were able to stay open because of digital connections. And that's before you even talk about the scientific innovation, the ability to share data and prototype that gave us vaccines in such record-setting time. There was an article just last week in Nature that talked about the exposure notification app that we and Apple developed together that prevented hundreds of thousands of infections and probably saved thousands of lives. So that's a real reminder of the real world impact that tech innovation can have on people's lives. We forget that we've doubled life expectancy over the last century alone, and there's a lot more to come. We obviously talk a lot about innovations like self-driving cars and artificial intelligence, but even quantum mechanics on the horizon. These things are going to help us solve some of our biggest challenges, from sustainability to healthcare to global development. So it's been great to see the bipartisan consensus that's emerging around the importance of investing in new R&D, working together, this combination of crisis and consensus that might actually lead America to double down on the amount of innovation we're doing, creating, we hope, a national innovation strategy with support for startups, with immigration reforms for top talent, with more public and private partnerships, and skills training, because that's a key piece. It's not just about giving all of us better tools. We need responsible innovation. We need tools that work for everybody so that there are on-ramps into this digital economy. That's why we're so happy, so pleased to be able to partner with more than 100 other companies on this career certificate program we launched last year to get people qualifications for high-paying, high-growth jobs that don't require a college degree, because you shouldn't need a college diploma to get a decent income. And we're very optimistic about the future of that.
Yeah, and that's a big trend in the tech space. I'm living in the Bay Area. It's a big part of the public discourse here. Mike, I want to pick up on the theme of transformation, of innovation. It's a beneficial concept, but it does have challenges that come with it. The digital divide and the pandemic have laid to bear inequities in our financial system. How can AI and data help address these challenges?
Well, it's a really good point. And as Kent was just saying, there's so many opportunities that are created through technology. We've got to be doubly focused on ensuring that we're not seeing a new digital divide emerge, whether that's literal broadband divide, that there's still parts of this country and certainly vast parts of the world that have no access to broadband internet, but also how data science itself is used. One thing that we've been focused on is, to answer your question, working with the Rockefeller Foundation, we created something called data.org, which really focuses on how to bring the benefits of data science and data analytics that have advanced so much in the private sector and bring those benefits to the public sector and the civic and social sector, to make sure we're taking those tools and applying them to some of the biggest and most significant social and economic challenges that we face as a country and as a society. I think AI and data science, as you say, could be very, very helpful there, but we have to be quite intentional about it. One, ensuring that we're not building biases into our AI algorithms that can further divide our society. And secondly, making sure that those tools are fully available to as broad a part of our society as possible, and that they're being used for good purposes. And again, that's a really important area of focus for not just us, but lots and lots of other companies, making sure that we're bringing those tools to the table in a way that has broader social impact.
Mike makes a good point about trust and integrity, and events like SolarWinds and the most recent pipeline attack undermine trust in a very connected world. How does Google view how companies and governments need to respond in some sort of partnership opportunities?
Yeah, it's absolutely right. The issue of network security, particularly critical infrastructure, government networks, is something that everybody on this call should be deeply concerned about. I started my career prosecuting computer crimes for the Department of Justice, and at Google, we're deeply focused on cybersecurity. We invest billions in network security tools. As we've all moved our lives online in the last year, the safety of those digital tools becomes even more crucial. So that's why we're putting privacy security at the forefront of our products so that people feel safer with Google. We know that people care about this. In the last year, we saw millions of people a day, more than ever before, visit our safety center, use our security checkup tools, et cetera. But more broadly, beyond any one company, how do we beef up the security of online systems that we all rely on? I think in the US, the recent executive order from the White House is a good start. It raises the bar for security practices. It lays out 8 different areas where we can modernize and strengthen U.S. government networks. But both government systems and the private sector have a long way to go here. We need modern zero trust architectures that don't take anything for granted. We need key players to diversify their IT platforms so they're not keeping all their eggs in one basket and we're not relying on a vulnerable monoculture. And so we look forward to working with the administration and other governments to implement best practices for cybersecurity.
Mike, along with this is the issue of governance. As technology adoption becomes more ubiquitous, there's been debate around the globe about how technology should be regulated. And I know that MasterCard and 20 other companies out there recently announced support for a new digital governance initiative proposing the creation of data technology, a forum around data and technology by the G7 to strengthen international coordination and consensus across the globe. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. I think just like coming out of the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, there was a real need to bring together governments and regulators around the table. Not that we're going to all adopt exactly the same regulation, but that at least we're avoiding going off into different directions and creating unnecessary frictions in the system. And then it was the Financial Stability Board that really stepped up and brought the financial regulators to the table. Here, what we're talking about is a data and technology forum that can bring the relevant folks from different governments around the table to wrestle with these challenging issues around privacy, around data flows, around technology standards, around the AI issue that you raised, and to share those perspectives. One challenge for us is that each government is set up quite differently when it comes to data and technology. Some have a data ministry or a data transformation person in their government, and others don't. And so getting the right group of people, because this cuts across financial sector, cuts across the real economy, cuts across a lot of different agencies, getting the right people around the table from like-minded countries who can begin to put together a coherent way of addressing these issues. Privacy is just one example. The Europeans, in many respects, have been ahead of the rest of the world in developing GDPR on privacy protections. But how can you, the question is, and I think that set a global standard that is now spreading elsewhere around the world. I think the question is, how can you protect privacy, which is absolutely critical, and at the same time, enjoy the benefits of innovation that Kent referred to that come from an open digital economy? And I think there is a way of doing that. And I think in many respects, we have moved a bit towards Europe when it comes to privacy. And in many respects, Europe, I think, is moving in the other direction to understand, particularly in the context of COVID, just how important it has been to be able to share information across borders that have led to vaccine development, that have led to the public health response. So there's a lot of good work to be done here. We think the G7 and its framework can be a good basis for it, and to broaden out from there so that you have more and more countries who share that perspective, particularly at a time when there are a lot of alternative perspectives out there as well.
That's right. There's a lot to consider. And Kent, let's stay on the topic of regulation. What do you think are the most important questions that regulators should be thinking about when they confront big cross-border challenges?
Well, Mike does a great job of highlighting 3 key points: how international cooperation can minimize fragmentation, the fact we need interoperable solutions for all this, and the fact we need to have a broad set of stakeholders at the table to make sure we get it right. Because we're well beyond the question of whether or not to regulate in some of these areas. The harder question is how to regulate well. Nobody wants fragmented or inconsistent regulation across issues or across countries, or even between U.S. states. Divergent, inconsistent regulations just increase complexity and cost for everyone, including startups and small businesses who are using digital tools. So, for example, everyone recognizes that a federal privacy law would be better than a patchwork of state efforts across 51 different regions governing in inconsistent ways. We've got countries from the US to the UK to Turkey to Russia who want to regulate online content in different ways. And even beyond geography, we're increasingly seeing tensions between legitimate interests and different kinds of values. So, for example, competition regulators want to see more data shared. Privacy regulators often want to see less data shared. How do we reconcile those tensions and work with governments to get to good, robust answers? We think the goal is to develop sensible regulations on questions like privacy and competition and taxation and artificial intelligence and content moderation that address these shared issues in a holistic way, that minimize the unintended side effects, and then that are aligned and, if possible, interoperable.
Mike, GDPR kicked off a wave of privacy regulations around the world, but it has also kicked off a challenge for data flows. How important are data flows and data transfer mechanisms?
Well, I think they are critical, and it goes to the innovation that technology makes possible. Look, I'll give you one example. We to build on something Kent said earlier, we're very much involved in cybersecurity as well, and our ability to see transactions all over the world and to see cyber intrusions all over the world and compare them and see patterns evolve has allowed us to save banks and central banks tens of billions of dollars over the last few years by being able to identify a new form of cyber intrusion and to stop it. If you have national clouds, bifurcated internets, balkanized internets, you only get to see a part of the picture, and you don't get to see those patterns that are emerging across the world. It's that ability to see something emerge in Ukraine, Nigeria, the Philippines, and Cleveland, Ohio, that allows you to say this is a new threat. And if you don't have that ability to see those cross-border data flows, it becomes much, much more difficult, and it ends up hurting rather than helping. Doesn't mean that you don't have to deal with privacy issues. Absolutely, you have to deal with privacy issues, but you can deal with both and not lose the benefits of an open digital economy.
Yeah, it's a fine balancing act there. Kent, governments are moving to erect regulatory frameworks on specific technologies, I know as well. What approach needs to be taken that factors in risks, but at the same time limits overreach? Because I know you have to weigh both of those considerations.
There's always a balance between new technology and efficiency and creativity, and making sure that democracies are able to have oversight and make sure that there's equity folded into this, so that we do have tools that work for everybody. We close the digital divide. We make sure that the kid in a poor inner city neighborhood has the same access to technology as a kid growing up in a more affluent environment. So a lot of the work we're doing is trying to lower the cost of innovation and make it accessible to everybody. Many of our services are free, and we're trying to find other ways to partner with other companies to make sure that those tools are as broadly available as possible.
Mike, anything to add here?
Look, I just think technology is moving much faster than governments have tended to move in the past. And there needs to be, I think, an approach that sets out some principles and sets out some standards and allows innovation to proceed, but is on the lookout for the risks that might emerge. I say something about standards if I can. I think historically we've probably done less good job in the United States of pursuing standards around the world than some of our competitors and from other parts of the world. And it's becoming more and more important that we have a seat at the table, we the United States has a seat at the table in trying to help define these standards to ensure that they are striking the right balance. And so that's governments, the private sector, in collaboration with each other, working to ensure that those standards are being developed in a way that reflects our interests and our values.
Ken, we know that the digital transformation has brought the world economically closer together, and in a span of months during the pandemic, even small or medium-sized businesses became global ones thanks to technology. How important is interoperability between regulatory frameworks and cross-border operations? How does that work? How do you meld it together to create more seamlessness?
Shemai, you're absolutely right. We are seeing Main Street going global. Many of these small businesses are reaching new audiences, new markets, not just around their country, but around the world. And that's a real powerful engine of growth for everybody. But at the same time, that also means that having common standards is increasingly important, because you don't want to have to navigate 190 different rules around the world if you're a small business. So, Europe's already started working on common regulation of technologies across their common market. Importantly, I think the next stage is some of the work that Mike and others are doing with the G7, but also the OECD on common tax frameworks, the WTO, even the UN are playing key roles in convening voices, getting people together to talk about collective solutions and provide guidance. Sometimes that's standard setting, sometimes that's co-regulation, sometimes that's industry regulation. That helps level the playing field for all of us. And the goal there is to have useful, implementable, interoperable regulations that don't duplicate and don't sort of step on each other's toes. You've already seen Europe calling for a transatlantic dialogue on trade and technology. We think that's a useful step. And I think the US has an opportunity to be a real leader in these processes. The administration seems to be leaning in here because at the end of the day, there's a natural complementarity between democracy and technology. That's a timeless and a necessary and done right, a productive relationship. So it's never been more important for all of us to work together on these governance frameworks that both address the issues and facilitate innovation that helps everybody.
Absolutely. And Mike, another thing we have to consider are trade agreements. What role do they have to prevent digital economic regulation from taking an industry policy bend? Because we know it also has to be fair and equitable in terms of that as well.
I think there's been a lot of good work done over the last several years on through the trade framework on these sorts of issues. Working on digital economy issues, for example, in the Obama administration, then made its way into the U.S.-Mexico-Canadian agreement and the U.S.-Japan agreement. It's part of what I understand is being negotiated between the U.S. and the U.K. And at the same time, there's a lot of interesting work going on in the Asia-Pacific with Singapore, New Zealand, Australia, Chile, South Korea, Japan, looking at digital economy frameworks. I think it creates a real opportunity to set a high standard for how to make sure that there is appropriate regulation and that we're able to maintain the benefits of an open digital economy. And I think between that and some of the work that we discussed earlier that could start in the G7 and go beyond that, it really begins to create that kind of coalition of the ambitious who can come together and set high standards for what is an increasingly important part of our economy.
Kent, I want to talk about something more futuristic, even though at Google it is not in the future. AI, artificial intelligence, and opportunities around that are massive in the tech space. And we know that Google is really part of the forefront of bringing this and immersing it in all parts of commerce and different parts of the economy. How big does Google believe AI, this opportunity, could be? And how do you think about responsible innovation? Because we know that those considerations are also work hand in hand and go in tandem with the development of that technology.
Yeah, but both sides of that question are extraordinarily important. We are very optimistic about the potential of artificial intelligence, machine learning. We're already seeing it in daily lives with companies around the world using tools to improve the way they conserve energy or handle retail stocking or provide financial services. There are opportunities in healthcare and lots of other areas. And that's before you get into the sort of generations of things where we can improve agricultural productivity or maybe contribute to bring clean water to people around the world. So this next generation of tools is going to be really powerful, and we're very excited about it. At the same time, we recognize that as you roll out new tools and new services, it has to be on a robust framework of trust. You have to have people believing that you have both the capability and the integrity and the intent of doing the right thing. And that's why we're so interested in partnering with others, working with governments, being very public about our AI principles, our responsible innovation programs, to talk about how do we make some of these trade-offs and balances between transparency and accountability, between equity and efficiency. These are going to be important discussions to have. The US has already put out a series of AI principles. Europe has put out some draft proposals in the last few months. We're very engaged in making sure that we can share the benefits of our experience and we can learn from others as we collaboratively move this whole sector of mathematics and ultimately of the economy forward.
Yeah, it's a huge opportunity, as we know as well. And Mike, within the fintech space, also a massive opportunity. Digital payments have exploded, not just for the big firms, for the small firms, for the medium-sized firms. We touched upon that earlier. Every business can be a global business in this environment. What's the upside for these companies? And what's the biggest hurdle in your mind and the way that MasterCard thinks about it?
Well, I think for parts of this ecosystem, it is going digital and integrating technology into their operations. And I'll just give you one example that we work very closely with a whole series of community development financial institutions, CDFIs, and have been working with them to help them upgrade their technology so that they can serve their customers who tend to be oftentimes excluded from the regular banking system, help them get access to credit efficiently. It worked out very well in that we had helped some of them, such as the Community Reinvestment Fund, put in place technology that when COVID hit, they were able to push through loans, billions of dollars of loans to their customers in a way that they would not have been able to without technology. So part of it is just getting over the hump of digitizing the operations. I think that's true of a lot of micro and small businesses too, who need a lot of help just getting online. You know, if you're a small business, you don't want to spend 25% of your time doing paperwork. You want to be able to digitize as much of that as you can, automate it as much as you can, be able to spend your time serving your customers and developing new products and the like. And I think that is again, it creates a great opportunity, but there's also an obstacle there that needs to be overcome. Some of that can be done with technology. Some of it can be done through mentoring and helping to train micro and small business owners. One thing we focused on now is how to include literally tens of millions of micro and small businesses and women-owned businesses in particular into the digital economy to help them succeed and thrive going forward.
Yeah, what you're doing is talking about the digital divide. And Kent, I know you alluded to the digital divide and the steps that Google is taking to help narrow it closer. How is the company addressing it specifically in different parts of the world? Because it's not just an issue here in the United States, it is a global issue. What is Google's perspective on it?
In the United States, over the course of the last year, we built on the work of Google.org to make significant contributions to some of the community financial institutions Mike was talking about a moment ago, to make sure that people have the resources and the capital to be able to get into these new areas of the economy that have so much potential. When you're talking internationally, much of the work we're doing is building tools that are accessible that in ways that they weren't before. The fact that if you live in India, you can purchase an Android phone for $30, $40, $50 and suddenly be connected to a global world of information that may help you know when to plant your crops or where to take your fish catch to market. That's incredibly empowering for small villages and businesses around the world. So we're very focused on trying to make sure that there's the old line that the future is here, it's just not evenly distributed yet. We want to make sure we distribute it as widely as possible. And digital tools actually turn out to be a remarkably powerful way of doing that.
In our last couple of minutes here, gentlemen, I want to ask you some final thoughts. What role, and I'll start with you, Mike, what role should the U.S. play in developing regulatory frameworks? What advice would you give to the Biden administration on filling that role? And Mike, you did allude to executive orders. Both of you alluded to executive orders issued last week. Anything more that the administration should consider?
Well, absolutely. Look, I think first and foremost, coming back to the table, engaging internationally, and being willing to exert political capital to show U.S. leadership abroad is absolutely important. And I found when I was in government that the only thing our allies and partners resented more than U.S. being overbearing is U.S. indifference. And they really want the U.S. at the table. And on these issues in particular, where we have so much innovation going on, where we have some of the leading countries of the world when it comes to technology platforms. We have the most vibrant fintech sector, for example, as well. So both large and small legacy and innovative. There's just so much going on. We have a lot to bring to the table with our allies and partners, and through our engagement, work with them to come up and reach consensus around a set of appropriate regulatory responses that allows that innovation to continue and does so in a responsible way. And one thing I would just add to the previous comment, when you look around the world, there is so much that is yet to be done to ensure that everybody participates in the digital economy. And I would just flag digital identity as being part of that. You still have over 1 billion people who have no formal identity. And making sure that as they're brought into the digital economy, that we're not putting their data at risk. It's not some big honeypot of information of biometric information that can be hacked, but that we're creating a framework and an architecture that allows it to be privacy by design and still allows them to participate in the benefits of the digital economy.
Kent, anything to add here?
I agree with Mike's framework here. We're seeing this incredible potential, but we want to make sure that it's exercised responsibly. At a time when there's declining trust in institutions in the United States, American pride in the advances we've had in science and technology is one of the bright spots. And we need to work with our government and with governments around the world to make sure that everybody has those benefits. There are policy components to it, and there are technology components as well. One of the books on my bookshelf is called Out of the Box, about how the rise of the standardized shipping container actually raised living standards around the world by taking friction out of the global economy. So there's a role for trade agreements, and there's also a role for technology in making sure everybody has a share in this digital future.
Mike and Kent, thank you so much for your time and your insights today.
Thanks very much.
Thanks for having us.
For our global audience, thank you for joining today's session with President Iván Duque of Colombia. This is going to be a very informative session. The president knows the United States quite well, having lived in Washington, D.C., where he had a distinguished career at the Inter-American Development Bank. And he brings a great deal of experience in dealing with the region and promoting regional economic integration in the Americas and fostering stronger ties between the United States and the region. Buenos dias. Good morning, President Duque. Thank you very much for joining us here today. It's always a pleasure to see you, and I wish next time we could do it in person. I love visiting your country, and as soon as we can do that, we will bring our business leaders back to your country. I just want to thank you on behalf of the U.S. Chamber today for joining the Chamber's Global Forum on Economic Recovery. As you know well, the U.S. Chamber has a long-standing commitment to Colombia and to its people. Our countries really do share an important strategic and economic partnership, which is why we launched the U.S. Chamber, launched the U.S. Colombia Business Council 4 years ago. I want to say personally how much we appreciate your strong support of the bilateral relationship, your advocacy for greater regional economic integration, and the support personally also of the bilateral council that the U.S. Chamber runs. Today, we'll draw on both your experience as head of state of Colombia, but also your deep experience at the Inter-American Development Bank. And while we really want to talk about a lot of issues, we can't start a conversation about the global economic recovery and the imperative for inclusive growth without starting with COVID. This is obviously top of mind for your government, as well as many others in the global community, and we have to get COVID-19 under control. Recently, the U.S. Chamber, working with other organizations, established a global task force for pandemic response. This is intended to really help spur private sector coordination with governments to address COVID-19. But I want to start with you, Mr. President, asking you, how are you dealing with the latest surges in Colombia, and how can the business community and frankly the international community, including the United States, help you in Colombia and other countries address this devastating pandemic? Mr. President?
Well, thank you so much, Myron. It's a great honor to be here with you. And let me begin by saying that definitely COVID-19 has been the most complicated crisis for the world, maybe since World War II. And if I may mention, the reasons why this has been so complex is because it is definitely a healthcare crisis, but at the same time, it constitutes an economic crisis, and it constitutes an unemployment crisis, and it constitutes a social crisis. So it's a multi-dimensional situation. And in the case of Colombia, since we were attacked by the pandemic, we decided to have a response along three lines. The first is address the pressure on the healthcare system. That's why we duplicated their ICU capacity from 5,400 to more than 13,000 today. So it was a very important expansion. And we're now the leaders in ICU capacity per 100,000 inhabitants in Latin America and the Caribbean. And we also decided to improve testing, train people from the medical community, and at the same time be able to track and to isolate people that were positive cases. So I think that was a very important evolution. But I think on the other hand, we had to do something very significant in terms of protecting the poorest of the poor and the people who could be the most affected by the crisis. And that's why we launched a social safety net program that has allowed us to attend almost 10 million families around the country with conditional and non-conditional cash transfers, and the giving back the VAT tax for the poorest of the poor, and be able to install a program of guarantees so that we can ensure that people in the private sector could get loans from the banking system out of 100 pesos, 90% was guaranteed by the government. And we also decided to put together, for the first time in our history, a payroll subsidy where we paid 40 or 50% of the payroll for the minimum wage of formal workers. So it was also a program aimed to protect them. And we decided to launch last year a program that is called Compromise for Colombia, which is our equivalent of a New Deal, so that we have infrastructure, energy, tertiary roads, housing, tourism, agricultural development to trigger growth and to be able to generate more than 2 million jobs. So at this moment, what we want to get is to grow this year above 5%. What we also want this year is to be able to see a boost in different sectors that are going to be dynamic for job generation. And if I may say something, Myron, we have been able to see this in a perspective where, in terms of the pandemic, in regarding indicators like deaths per million and contagions per million and lethality rate, I think we look in a much better shape than many countries around the world and even many developed countries. So I think those are, in a nutshell, the things that we have done. But now we're getting into a process where we are moving fast on vaccination. We expect to vaccinate 35 million Colombians by the end of the year or sooner. And we expect the country to have the growth that I mentioned, above 5%. And I hope that tomorrow that the number that will come out from our National Bureau of Statistics about the growth in the first quarter of 2021 can come with a message that is the recession is over and now we're getting back to positive growth lines. So that's how I would respond to your question, Myron.
Well, Mr. President, I do want to talk about growth rates, but before I do, let me just return to one aspect of your question that I had initially, which is how can the international community help out Colombia at this time and other countries that have been hit hard? What do you want from the private sector, including from the United States?
The most important thing that can be done in a post-pandemic scenario, and actually in the times that we're living, is to nearshore operations from around the world to the Americas, because I believe that nearshoring, considering that we're close to market, can represent the most important opportunity for Latin America and the Caribbean, but especially for a country like Colombia. Colombia will be celebrating 200 years of diplomatic relations with the United States in 2022. We have a good set of U.S. corporations that are based in Colombia to attend the Latin American and Caribbean market. But I would say, Myron, that at this moment, the most important thing is that nearshoring can represent a very significant opportunity. And also, I think the United States can really help us to have a larger stock of vaccines in the next 2 months. Because yes, we have bought the vaccines and we have had the flow of the vaccines, but if we get to have a larger stock, let's say a 10 million vaccine stock, I think that will trigger a more dynamic process of vaccination in our countries, especially because I think we're moving in the right direction according to our plan, but we have the possibility to be able to give something close to 300,000 vaccines per day. So if we have a bigger stock, I think that can accelerate the vaccination process in Latin America, in our country, and that can represent an opportunity to gain some normality, if we could call it like that.
Okay, so it's really
something that I would like to mention. I think it will be interesting as well for the United States through DFC to mobilize investment and be able to use financial products such as guarantees for companies to issue debt with the possibility of having longer term and better rates.
So we'll take up your challenge and talk to our government about the vaccine issue and, of course, about the DFC. I want to turn to inclusive growth because you talked about the 5% target, which is actually a pretty bullish target. And I know that business leaders and government leaders, we're all focused on the imperative for inclusive growth. Really, frankly, because the world is recovering from this pandemic and it will be staged recovery. You have made such great progress in Colombia in reducing poverty by nearly half. But I think the pandemic has obviously had an impact on the economy and has diminished some of those gains. So you talked about how you're trying to address that in Colombia. But how concerned are you about rising poverty rates, not just in your country, but in the region? And how do we take solutions, practical solutions to strengthen the middle class?
Well, I would say, Myron, that in our case, we definitely had a growth on poverty. We passed from 37% to 42%. And if we would have not done anything with the social programs that we did, we could have gotten even to 50%. So I think the social programs have been working and it has giving us the possibility to contain part of the negative effects from the pandemic in terms of poverty. And actually, when we look at the rural areas, what we saw was a reduction on the poverty rate because we were able to mobilize non-conditional cash transfers to many, many families. Now, how can we resolve the situation of poverty and try to be back where we were before the pandemic? I think it's also regarding employment because there is a clear linkage between employment or unemployment and poverty. So if we get to recover formal jobs, I think that will have an impact. And as we start getting back to normality in the education system, whether it's alternancy or whether it's just continuous journey, what matters is that many mothers around Latin America and especially in Colombia have been taking care of their kids at home. And why? Because their kids are educating themselves virtually. So once they start recovering presential education, I think that is also going to trigger the possibility that more women are going to look for jobs. Now, are the jobs going to be available? I think that's the kind of help we need because yes, investment, transformation, and also value-added chains are mechanisms to generate that employment in our country. And we're actually thinking of a policy where we can subsidize Social Security if you hire young people between 18 and 28 for the first 5 years, and if we do the same with women that have lost their jobs during the pandemic. So those are two policies that I mentioned that could be interesting to evaluate with U.S. corporations that are based in Colombia so that they can also play a starting role in this kind of solutions.
Well, we'll take up the challenge, Mr. President, to look at those issues with your government and your private sector. You have talked about briefly and passionately in the past about rebalancing some of the value chains to the Americas, and frankly, with the focus on Colombia, but also the region at large. You referenced some other opportunities to drive regional economic growth. Are you at all worried about what's going on in the region? Are you worried about efforts to impede trade flows, some protectionist initiatives undertaken in an environment where countries are really struggling to recover from the COVID-19 situation? Or are you optimistic? Where do you stand on this?
I mean, I'm always an optimistic, Myron. I'm always an optimistic, but I should say this. We're living in moments of international politics that are highly polarized. I mean, you have suffered it in the United States. We have suffered it in Colombia. We have seen this around the world. And there are going to be many political cycles in Latin America in the next months. And we will have the election in Peru in June, and we'll have the election in Chile in November. We will have the election in Colombia next year. We'll have the election in Brazil next year. So we know that there's a big political cycle. Now, COVID-19 has driven many societies into many problems. We all have to move out of those problems. But I think what we're seeing is that there are a lot of social sentiments that are arising. There are a lot of social sentiments that can turn into fury by demagogues or populists trying to capitalize those sentiments in their favor. So it's very important at this moment that whatever we do in terms of protecting the people that have been more affected by the pandemic, it's done fast. And we have seen it in Colombia. We have seen that there is a national strike movement, that it has also political linkages. We have seen that there are genuine, peaceful claims from citizens. But we have also seen that there are people who are trying to use violence to generate chaos in different places. These kinds of situations are going to be seen not only in Colombia, are going to be seen in the rest of the world, maybe in the next year and a half, and especially when many countries will have to go and find the funding to pay for all they have expended during the pandemic, and at the same time for all that is going to be needed for the next years. So I see those red lights, but I also believe that it is a time for opportunity. So if we build national consensus towards many issues, I think that supports and helps and allows us to be very effective. Now, the challenge is it's going to be more complicated within a political cycle, because people in the political cycles will like to take advantage of whatever they can to win elections. So I think we have to separate those things, and that's why in our country there's no re-election. I'm highly committed to fulfill the objectives of our National Development Plan. And we hope that this year we can put together a plan to respond to the needs of the young people who are the ones who are claiming peacefully that they want to have better opportunities for the future. And that only happens if we have a vibrant private sector and we have a growing set of investments from abroad in our country.
Well, we're optimistic, too, about the recovery in the United States and the long-term prospects for the world. But tell us what you think the United States' role should be in the region at this critical moment. You mentioned, obviously, helping out with vaccines. But beyond that, what should we be looking to from Washington? What do you think is really critically important as the region is struggling to recover from the pandemic?
That's a great question, Myron. That's a great question. And I think at this moment, there is an opportunity. This year, 2021, we're going to be celebrating, or we are celebrating 60 years of the Alliance for Progress. The Alliance for Progress was launched by President Kennedy with his charisma and his vision that there had to be a close relationship between the United States and Latin America. I think nearshoring can be a practical, instrumental, and effective vehicle to generate that sort of a new partnership and or new alliance. That is very important. The second thing is we are in Latin America emerging markets, Myron. We are seeing now that inflation rates in the United States starting to rise. And the biggest worry in most of the countries where we have reduced our interest rates is that if we reduce our interest rates and the United States starts pushing the interest rates high, what happens is that there might be a pressure of outflows from capital from Latin America to safe havens, in that case, the United States. So we have to consider that whatever decision the United States makes on our monetary policy in the following months, it is definitely going to have an impact in Latin America. And we don't want to see that as a negative impact, because we really need to have investment and liquidity flows to our region. But that's something that I should highlight. Now, something the United States has to do, in my opinion, humbly, is that there are mechanisms in which the United States can do things faster with the region. Obviously, the U.S. has DFC, has USAID, and many other agencies. But for example, I think the capital increase of the Inter-American Development Bank is something that it will be very important to have, so that the bank can irrigate not only resources, but can develop new tools and new products that fulfill the needs of countries in Latin America. Like, for example, partial credit guarantees, like, for example, policy-based loans with a more rapid response or disbursement, and the possibility to have post-COVID lines. And if I may say something, I think this is the opportunity for the United States also to work along with the IMF, and that, I believe, can be done by Secretary Yellen, and it is to sit down with the IMF and create post-COVID fiscal recovery plans for the good performers in Latin America. Those are ideas that I have in my mind, Myron, and that I think the U.S. can make a big influence.
Mr. President, if I had time, I would go into more depth about inflation and the risks for the region. But let me switch to one last topic. I want to talk about climate change, because this is another shared global challenge. You participated in last month's White House Global Summit on climate change. Tell us what your government's trying to do in this area, what you're trying to achieve in terms of climate targets, and how important this is to not just sustainability, but in the context of dealing with the Amazon and the issues around deforestation. So, Mr. President, your thoughts?
Myron, I would say this. I was reading Bill Gates' book some weeks ago, and he said something very interesting. He said, let's start with two numbers. The first number he mentioned was 51 billion tons that are generated year over year of greenhouse gases and or CO2 emissions. And he said the next challenge is zero. What does that mean? That we need to move to a world of carbon neutrality. Now, Colombia only represents 0.6% of all the greenhouse gases emissions or CO2 emissions around the world, 0.6. But Colombia is one of the top 20 more threatened countries by the effects of climate change. So what can Colombia do, and what could be a reference? We have said publicly that by 2030, we're going to cut by 51% our CO2 emissions. And we said that we want to reach carbon neutrality in 2050. Those are the goals. How do we make it possible? We are accelerating energy transition like no other time before in our history. We're passing from 0.2% of our energy matrix based on non-conventional renewables to more than 14% by the end of my term next year. That's the biggest energy transition. And if I may say this, we're going to pass from 30 megawatts to more than 2,000 megawatts just in my administration. But we also said, let's talk about clean transportation. We approved the electric vehicle bill, and now we have the largest public transportation fleet based on electrical vehicles. We also have the largest cargo fleet based on electrical vehicles. And even in 2020, the year when the pandemic arose, the sales of electric vehicles was above 70%. This year, we're going to be above 100% compared to the previous year and the previous year. So that means that's going on well. We also think that the circular economy policy is crucial with all the industrial sector, where we assume that we have to produce conserving and conserve producing, and reducing the individual carbon footprint so that we all know how to reduce, reuse, recycle, and how can we have better performance in our daily life regarding how intensive in terms of energy is our daily life. But I should also mention the protection of the Amazon, the protection of the high altitude ecosystems through the Leticia Pact and the Biodiverse Cities initiative that we launched with Klaus Schwab yesterday. And last but not least, Myron, something that we all have to do. The best technology to capture CO2 are trees. So that's why we engage in the 1 Trillion Trees Initiative that was launched in the WEF 2 years ago with Mark Benioff and Klaus Schwab. And we said that we were going to plant 180 million trees by the end of my administration. We're going to close this year with 125 million trees planted, and we'll get to the 180 million trees planted by August next year. So in a nutshell, those are the things that we're doing in Colombia, and definitely fighting climate change is the most challenging issue of our time.
Mr. President, Bill Gates is going to be closing the 2-day program, so he'll welcome the fact that you spoke to his book. But let me just say this. Your commitment to plant trees, your commitment to climate change is very much welcome. And of course, we hope that other countries in the region contribute as well. And we look forward to being part of the dialogue with your government and others in Latin America. I would just want to thank you on behalf of the U.S. Chamber and our global audience for participating today. There's a lot in your answers that we could not get deeper into, but you gave us a lot to think about. What you should take away from this is our commitment to your country, to your people, to inclusive growth, to supporting your recovery from COVID, and of course, our commitment to the longstanding ties between the United States and Colombia. Thank you very much on behalf of everyone for joining today's Global Forum on Economic Recovery. Next time in person,
Thank you so much,
Mr. President. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Myron. I look forward to see you in person pretty soon. All the best.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, and thank you for joining day one of the U.S. Chamber's Global Forum on Economic Recovery. I'm Marjorie Chorlins, Senior Vice President for European Affairs at the U.S. Chamber. Today, we had the opportunity to hear from 2 heads of state, from business leaders and government officials about progress in responding to the coronavirus here in the U.S. and abroad, about the importance of inclusive strategies for growth, and leveraging the power of the digital economy. Many thanks to all of our exceptional leaders for their insights. 2 things to take away. First, American leadership is essential. And second, partnerships between the U.S. and her allies and between business and government will be critical to end the pandemic and achieve the dynamic, inclusive, resilient, and sustainable recovery we all seek. Our program continues tomorrow at 9 a.m. Eastern, when we'll welcome more policymakers and business leaders who will speak to trade, U.S.-China relations, sustainability, energy, and so much more. We'll hear from IMF Deputy Managing Director Antoinette Saye, from His Excellency Prime Minister Lee of Singapore, and from U.S. Senator Mitt Romney of Utah. Our CEO, Suzanne Clark, will have a conversation with Bill Gates that you'll not want to miss. In closing, I'd like to thank our sponsors, Google, Amazon, and UPS, whose sponsorship made this event possible. For now,